यस। उस वक्त एक बाबा थे, कोई धर्म संसद हुआ था हरिद्वार में, वहां से एक बाबा आए और जंतर मंतर पे वो भाषण दे रहे थे। भीड़ थी खड़ी, और भाषण में वो सीधा कॉल उनका ये था कि तुम मुसलमानों को या क्रिश्चियंस को कब मारोगे। सो द बाबा वॉज ड्रेस्ड इन सेफरन, और हमने उसे रिकॉर्ड किया, हमने उसको पब्लिश किया, सेइंग कि भाई ये जो तरीका है, ये जो भाषण है, वो भी दिल्ली में जंतर मंतर पर खड़े होकर, ये गलत है, ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए। और द कंटेंट वाज टेकन डाउन। हमारे पास पुलिस का एक नोटिस आया कि हम लोग एनिमिटी फैला रहे हैं अपने कंटेंट के जरिए, और ये पुलिस का नोटिस भी था, कंटेंट हमारा टेक डाउन हो गया था। फिर हमने पहली बार ये लगा कि मैं बाय क्वालिफिकेशन इंजीनियर हूँ, सो कमिंग इनटू जर्नलिज्म ये मेरा चॉइस था। मतलब ऐसा कुछ नहीं था कि मैं कुछ और नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ इसलिए जर्नलिस्ट बन गया हूँ। कई लोग इस इंडस्ट्री में ऐसे भी होंगे, और हर इंडस्ट्री में होते हैं। सो बाय चॉइस मैं जर्नलिस्ट बना। अच्छा, जर्नलिस्ट बनने के पीछे वजह जो थी वो ये थी कि ऐसा लगता था कि क्रांति व्रांति हम लोग ले आएंगे। बहुत सारी दिक्कतें हैं, अब प्रधानमंत्री नहीं बन सकते हम, सांसद नहीं बन सकते, विधायक नहीं बन सकते, मंत्री नहीं बन सकते, लेकिन इन लोगों से सवाल पूछ सकते हैं। अच्छा, जो मेरी पूरी तरबियत स्कूल में रही या कॉलेज में रही, हम देखते थे कि जो हाशिए पे मौजूद लोग हैं उनकी आवाज कोई सुन नहीं रहा है। राइट, महात्मा गांधी जी का जंतर, मैं किताबें पढूं या ना पढूं, एनसीईआरटी के किताब में पहले चैप्टर पे वो जंतर आता था कि जब भी आप कोई फैसला लें तो हाशिए के व्यक्ति के बारे में सोचें। तो मुझे लगा ये बड़ा ऐसा ऐसी इंडस्ट्री है जहां पे हम जाके जो हमने पढ़ा है या जो हम फील कर रहे हैं उसको इम्प्लीमेंट कर सकते हैं। तो मैंने तो वही किया था, वो वीडियो रिकॉर्ड करके कि कोई एक 85-90 साल का बूढ़ा मुझे जो मानसिक बीमार लगता है, वो सीधे तौर पर वायलेंस का कॉल कर रहा है, वो सीधे तौर पर लोगों को उकसा रहा है कि सांप्रदायिक कम्युनल लाइंस पे लोगों की हत्या करे। वो मैंने उसको दिखाया और मैंने कहा ये गलत है, ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए, बट माई कॉन्टेंट वॉज टेकन डाउन। तो द वेरी आइडिया ऑफ जर्नलिज्म वो मेरे लिए थोड़ा सा तो बदला। मैंने कहा नहीं नहीं, ऐसा कुछ है नहीं, क्रांति भ्रांति एक दीवार है, उस दीवार के अंदर रहकर ही तुमको करना पड़ेगा अगर तुम बहुत सेफ और सेफ्टी नेट के साथ करना चाहते हो तो। लेकिन फिर मैंने ये आइडिएट किया कि मैं आई वाज वेरी गुड इन एकेडमिक्स एज वेल, सो मैंने कहा मैं इंजीनियरिंग कर सकता था, मैं वो करियर ऑप्शन ऑप्ट कर सकता था, लेकिन मैं चॉइस के साथ ऐसा हुआ हूँ। और एक मात्र वजह ये थी कि मैं किससे झुकूंगा नहीं। प्रधानमंत्री हैं तो मैं उनसे सवाल पूछ सकता हूँ, ही एंड मी आर इक्वल, है ना। और अच्छा, इसमें कई कई सारी बातें हो जाएंगी। इक्वालिटी जो है वो वोट से होती है, वो भी आजकल छीना जा रहा है, बहरहाल ये अलग मुद्दा है ना। तो वो पहली बार जब टेक डाउन हुआ था तो एक बार तो ये लगा कि यार जो जो मैंने सोचा था ऐसा कुछ है नहीं जर्नलिज्म में। दूसरा मैंने कहा था जो मैंने सोचा वो मैं तो करूंगा, मुझ में तो है, मतलब इमोटिवली। और उसके बाद फिर मैं देखता हूँ लगातार हमारी जो रिपोर्टिंग है, इट्स नॉट ओनली ऑन यूट्यूब, फेसबुक पे भी हम करते थे, इंस्टाग्राम पे भी हम करते थे इसलिए क्योंकि फिलहाल फेसबुक और इंस्टाग्राम पे हमारा चैनल एग्जिस्ट करता नहीं है, हमारा अपना मोबाइल एप्लीकेशन है, वेबसाइट भी है, सो इट्स अ मीडिया ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, राइट। तो हमारी पूरी रिपोर्टिंग था सोशियो पॉलिटिकल मीडिया, और हमारा आइडिया ये था कि हर एक मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म पे बहुत सारी चीजें हैं, बहुत सारी इंडस्ट्री है, स्पोर्ट्स भी है, एंटरटेनमेंट भी है, लाइफस्टाइल भी है, और पॉलिटिक्स भी है। हमने कहा केवल पॉलिटिकल चीजें जो हैं और सोशल हैपनिंग्स जो है हम उसको कवर करेंगे, रिपोर्ट करेंगे। तो उसके साथ धीरे धीरे ये चीजें आती ही रही। हम कुंभ में गए रिपोर्ट करने, हमको व्यवस्थाएं कम दिखी, कुव्यवस्थाएं ज्यादा दिखी। हमको दिखा कि भाई शौचालय जो है वेल फंक्शनल नहीं है, महिलाएं तो जा ही नहीं सकती हैं, हमें ये दिख रही थी, हम रिपोर्ट कर रहे थे। पर सेंसरशिप या वीडियो टेक डाउन या कंटेंट टेक डाउन की जो चीजें हैं उसका पेस अगर मैं देखूं तो इस साल बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ा है। मेनी ऑफ आवर कार्टून्स जो हम पब्लिश करते हैं वो कार्टून्स टेक डाउन किए गए, बहुत सारे वीडियोस जो हैं वो टेक डाउन किए गए। एप्स्टीन फाइल्स में जब पहली बार नरेंद्र मोदी का नाम अपीयर हुआ था, आई मेड अ वीडियो ऑन दैट, और उसके बाद एक नोटिस आया हमारे पास, नोटिस वाज फ्रॉम MeitY, और उसमें यह था कि हमको अपीयर होने के लिए बोला गया कि एक जूम मीटिंग वो लोग कंडक्ट कर रहे हैं जिसमें वो बताएंगे, ऑफिशियल्स होंगे मिनिस्ट्री से, जो बताएंगे कि हमारा कंटेंट क्यों उनको दिक्कत दे रहा है। इट वाज नॉट टेकन डाउन, लेकिन एक मीटिंग हुई थी, वो मीटिंग हमने अटेंड की। आर रिप्रेजेंटेटिव हेमंत यादव जो हमारी टीम में ही हैं, उन्होंने वो मीटिंग अटेंड की, और हमसे ये कहा गया, मतलब कोई ग्राउंड नहीं बताया गया कि तुमको दिक्कत किस चीज से है। उनका ये कहना था किया क्यों है तुमने। मैंने कहा अरे हमने कर दिया, हमारा मन था हमने कर दिया, और फैक्ट बेस्ड है, तुम बताओ ना परेशानी क्या है तुमको। तो कोई परेशानी उनको थी नहीं एज सच, मतलब बताने के लिए। फिर एक लाइन बोला गया हमसे कि क्यों एक वीडियो के चक्कर में अपना पूरा चैनल जो है वो खत्म कर रहे हो, अपनी पूरी मेहनत खत्म कर रहे हो। तो हमने कहा कोई बात नहीं, वो मतलब आप क्या कहना चाहते हैं बताइए, ही वॉज नॉट वेरी क्लियर अबाउट इट। फिर उन्होंने कहा कि क्या कर सकते हो। मैंने कहा तो मैक्सिमम वी कैन डू कि थंबनेल जो है वो हम चेंज कर सकते हैं। अच्छा, और कई चीजों को स्वीकार करने में हम लोगों को परेशानी नहीं होनी चाहिए। जो अल्टरनेटिव स्पेस की बात आप कर रही थी, वो अल्टरनेटिव स्पेस जो खड़ा हुआ है वो यूट्यूब पे खड़ा हुआ है, फेसबुक पे खड़ा हुआ है, इंस्टा पे खड़ा हुआ है, ट्विटर पे खड़ा हुआ है। और इस अल्टरनेटिव स्पेस की भी अपनी मजबूरियां हैं। मैंने कंटेंट प्रोड्यूस कर दिया, वो मासेस तक पहुंचना भी चाहिए, जिसमें थंबनेल्स बहुत सारा रोल प्ले करती हैं। ठीक है, तो बहुत सारे लोगों के, बहुत सीनियर जर्नलिस्ट की भी थंबनेल्स जो है कई बार आपको प्रॉब्लमेटिक लग सकती हैं। लेकिन ऐसा है ना कि फिल्मों के टाइटल जो होते हैं वो भी तो प्रॉब्लमेटिक होते हैं कई बार, वो पूरी कहानी तो बयान करते नहीं है। लेकिन फिर भी हमने कहा कि वी आर एक्सेप्टिंग कि थंबनेल में कुछ दिक्कत ऐसी आपको लग सकती है, उसको हम रिमूव कर सकते हैं। तो वो हमने किया। फिर इसी साल हमें ये पता पड़ा, सेंसरशिप वाला मामला तो 2 वीक 28 मार्च को बल्कि जो हमारा फेसबुक पेज था वो ब्लॉक किया गया, और दी लास्ट सैटरडे इंस्टाग्राम अकाउंट जो है वो हमारा सस्पेंड किया गया है। तो फाइनल तो इस तरीके से निरूपित हुआ, लेकिन ऑल टुगेदर जो चीजें थी वो सेंसरशिप की तरफ ही थी। और पिछले 9 सालों से मैं इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन से जुड़ा हूँ, 4 सालों से मीडिया प्रोडक्शन में है, रिपोर्ट्स हम लोग पहले से भी कर रहे हैं कंसिस्टेंटली, 4 सालों से हम लोग मीडिया प्रोडक्शन कर रहे थे। तो सेंसरशिप की ये जो फीलिंग थी ना, ये पता पड़ रही थी। पता कैसे जैसे पहली बार जो मैंने आपको वाकया बताया कि वीडियो हमारा टेक डाउन होता है, उसके बाद हम कोई कंटेंट पब्लिश करते हैं, पूरी एक आईटी ट्रोल आर्मी जो है वो हमको टारगेट करती है। तो वो भी सेंसरशिप का एक तरीका ही तो था ना, कि भाई वो लोग हमें टारगेट करेंगे और हम डर के कारण वो बोलना छोड़ देंगे। मतलब कई लड़कियां मैं ऐसा जानता हूं जो हमारे साथ पढ़ती थी, जो इस इंडस्ट्री में थी, जिन्होंने छोड़ दिया, क्योंकि हम गालियां सुनने के लिए काम थोड़ी कर रहे हैं। तो इट वाज एक तरीका सेंसर करने का, डराने का। इसके अलावा फिर जो आप ग्राउंड पे रिपोर्ट करने जाते हैं कई दफा, मतलब एक मैथिली ठाकुर का इंटरव्यू मैंने किया था बिहार इलेक्शंस के दौरान। उस वक्त मैंने सोच समझ के अपनी माइक आईडी जो है वो हटा दी थी। और ये इसलिए था क्योंकि मुझे पता था पॉलिटिक्स की माइक आईडी देख के शायद इनके इस कंटेंट से इस पूरे इकोसिस्टम को दिक्कत हो सकती है और वो हमें हैकल कर सकते हैं। सो रिपोर्टर्स वर हैकल्ड ऑन द ग्राउंड। ये भी एक तरीका सेंसर करने का ही था। हम लोग अपनी माइक आईडी लेके फ्रीली बात नहीं कर सकते हैं। हम किसी भी रिपोर्टिंग के लिए जाते थे, लोग हमसे पूछते तुम कौन से वाले पत्रकार हो, भाजपा वाले कि कांग्रेस वाले। मतलब ये क्या तरीका हो सकता है। मुझे ये लगता है कि किसी भी चैनल या किसी भी प्लेटफॉर्म को बंद करना कोई ऑब्जेक्टिव ही है। ऑब्जेक्टिव है द आइडिया टू क्वेश्चन को बंद करना, और उसके लिए बहुत सारे कारक जो है वो काम कर रहे थे। आईटी टूल्स एक फैक्टर था, दूसरा फैक्टर आप ग्राउंड पे जाएंगे, आप हैकिंग के शिकार होंगे। मतलब ग्रुप ऑफ पीपल हैं, जो जैसे आप कनॉट प्लेस पे जाएं, कनॉट प्लेस पे ग्रुप ऑफ पीपल हमेशा खड़े रहते हैं, जो वॉक्स पॉपिंग का एक कल्चर जो स्टार्ट हुआ है उसमें। और जैसे ही आप उनके आइडिया से अलग आइडिया पे बात करेंगे, दे स्टार्ट हैकलिंग यू। ठीक है, तो वो भी मुझे सेंसरशिप का ही तरीका दिख रहा था। उसका वीडियो टेक डाउन वगैरह करना ये तो क्लियरली था। और फिर फाइनली हमारा मेटा पेज गया और इंस्टाग्राम अकाउंट गया। अच्छा, जिस दिन मेटा पेज गया हमारा, इंडिया में उसकी एक्सेस जो है वो डिनाई की गई। उसके नेक्स्ट डे वी क्रॉस्ड आई गेस 400K ऑन इंस्टाग्राम। ठीक है, और हमने ये लगा एक तरह का डिमोटिवेशन तो था ही कि भाई इतनी सारी मेहनत करने के बाद मेटा का पेज चल रहा था, अच्छा ये चला गया है। हमने कहा अब इसको थोड़ा सा एड्रेस करते हुए टीम में भी मोटिवेशन बना रहे। हमने एक केक वगैरह काटा ऑफिस में, वो हमने चलाया। तो डिस्पाइट इट बीइंग बैंड इन इंडिया, ठीक ठाक वो परफॉर्म कर रहा था। ठीक है, लेकिन होता क्या है, आपका पेज बंद हो गया, अब कोर्ट का केस चल रहा है, उसमें रिट हमने फाइल किया, हाई कोर्ट में एक सुनवाई हो चुकी है, एक हियरिंग आज है, जिसमें अपार गुप्ता जो है इंटरनेट फ्रीडम फाउंडेशन के, वो पूरी मदद हम लोग की कर रहे हैं। ही इज फाइटिंग दिस केस। 14, 15, 20 दिनों से हमारा प्लेटफॉर्म मेटा पे नहीं है, हमारा चैनल मेटा पे नहीं है। एल्गोरिथमिकली जो हमारी फ्रिक्वेंसी होगी, जो फैलने की चीज होगी, वो नहीं फैलेगी, वो अपने आप कट डाउन हो जाएगा। जो ऑडियंस है उसकी मेमोरी से मॉलिटिक्स नाम गायब हो सकता है, क्योंकि वहां पे उनके पास कंज्यूम करने के लिए बहुत सारी चीजें हैं। शेडो बैन, मुझे लगता है बहुत सारे लोग से फेमिलियर होंगे इस वर्ड से। हमारा पेज शेडो बैन था। शेडो बैन के बावजूद 28 दिनों में हम लोगों ने 4.1 मिलियन जो रीच था वो गार्नर किया था। तो लोग देख तो रहे ना, लोग सुन तो रहे हैं। आप इसी को एक्चुअली डाउन कर देना चाहते हैं। सो द आइडिया इज नॉट टू close or shut a channel, but the idea is to kill the idea to question. What do you think?
Who else is there? Haseen is there? No. Ambuj? Ambuj is there. Okay. 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 I don't know where to look, but so same question, Ambuj और संजय जी के लिए actually. अम्बुज के लिए जब लोकहित इंडिया का कॉन्टेक्ट टारगेट होता है, जैसे उन्होंने बताया, नीरज ने बताया कि मेटी से एक बार आपको डॉक्यूमेंट वो मेल मिला था मीटिंग के लिए, बट लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स इट इज जस्ट द ट्रोल एंड द होल आइडिया ऑफ कि आप नहीं कर सकते ये रिपोर्टिंग. तो अम्बुज जी, आपके लिए जो सवाल था कि ये आपको किस किस से मेल ऐसे मिला है, इज इट फ्रॉम द गव, सरकार से मिला है, प्लेटफॉर्म से मिला है, और आप उस सिचुएशन को हैंडल कैसे किए हैं?
सभी को नमस्कार. संजय सर हैं, नमस्कार. मैं बताना ये चाहूँगा कि लगभग अब तक 4 बार इस तरह की चीज़ें हमने फील किया है. और जो शुरुआत हुई थी वो तो जैसा कि अभी बताया गया कि एक तरह से गाली गलौज, धमकियाँ देना, मेल के ज़रिए धमकियाँ देना, ये सारी चीज़ें तो आम थी. हालाँकि पिछले लगभग 3 साल से ये चीज़ें बंद हो चुकी हैं. सबसे पहले हमने फ़ील किया था साल 2024 के चुनाव के दौरान, जब हमने 10 साल का रिकॉर्ड निकालना शुरू किया सरकार का और सवाल करना शुरू किया, तो अचानक से एक दिन पता चलता है कि रात में लगभग 3-4 बजे एक मेल आता है यूट्यूब की तरफ से कि आपका चैनल डिमोनेटाइज़ कर दिया गया है. हम बार-बार पूछते रहे कि भाई चैनल पे जितनी भी वीडियो है, हर वीडियो पहले आप चेक करते हैं, इसके बाद वो मोनेटाइज़ होती है. सारी वीडियोज़ मोनेटाइज़्ड हैं, तो फिर चैनल डिमोनेटाइज़ क्यों है? ऐसा क्या मिल गया? महीने भर हम लगातार पूछते रहे, लेकिन यूट्यूब के पास कोई साफ-सुथरा जवाब नहीं था. इसके बाद जैसे ही चुनाव लगभग समापन की तरफ पहुँचा, हालाँकि हमारी ये कोशिश थी कि जो हम करना शुरू कर चुके थे उसको रोकें नहीं, लेकिन फिर भी कुछ दिनों तक डिस्टर्बेंस हुई, क्योंकि चैनल मेरा अकेले का नहीं है, हमारे पीछे कम से कम 7-8 परिवार और हैं जिनका सब कुछ इसी से चलता है. तो जैसे ही चुनाव खत्म होने पर आया, तो अचानक से यूट्यूब एक दिन मेल करता है कि आपका चैनल ठीक-ठाक है, अब ये मोनेटाइज़ेशन के लिए काबिल है. मोनेटाइज़ेशन हो जाता है. यानी वहीं से ये एक तरीका समझ में आया कि जब सत्ता परेशान होती है, यानी जब इनको ये चारों तरफ से घिरे हुए नज़र आते हैं, तो ये निशाना बनाते हैं पत्रकारों को, स्वतंत्र पत्रकारों को यूट्यूब पर खासकर, और जितने भी प्लेटफ़ॉर्म है इस तरह के सब पे. इसके बाद दोबारा हमने देखा अभी एएनआई वाला जो मामला चल रहा था वो तो आप सबको पता ही है. इसके बाद हाल ही में 3-4 महीने पहले, जैसा कि बताया गया कि एपस्टीन फाइल वाला जब मामला आया था, मैंने एक वीडियो किया था. हालाँकि वो पूरी तरह से एपस्टीन फाइल पे बेस्ड नहीं था. महाराष्ट्र के पूर्व मुख्यमंत्री हैं चव्हाण जी, उन्होंने एक बयान दिया था कि 19 तारीख को जब फाइल खुलेगी तो हो सकता है भारत के प्रधानमंत्री बदल जाएँ. तो मैंने थंबनेल पे लिखा था कि 19 तारीख को बदल सकते हैं भारत के प्रधानमंत्री, बड़ा-सा क्वेश्चन मार्क. इसके बाद ये वीडियो ठीक-ठाक चलने लगी. हमें लगता है कि 6-7 लाख के आसपास कुछ ही दिनों में इसका था व्यूज़ यूट्यूब पे. एक मेल आता है कि आपने ये जो वीडियो किया है, इसके बारे में आप ब्रीफ करिए. एक ज़ूम मीटिंग होगी, आप लोग अधिकारियों को बताइए कि आपने इसमें मतलब इसको हम हटाना चाहते हैं. मीटिंग शुरू होती है, लगभग 1 घंटे हम वेट करते रहे. जो टाइम दिया गया था, उस टाइम के बाद तक वेट करते रहे, तब जाके नंबर आया. मीटिंग में उन्होंने कहा कि भई चैनल का नाम तो आपका बहुत अच्छा है, काम भी अच्छा है, लेकिन प्रधानमंत्री तो बदले नहीं अभी. हमने कहा कि भई प्रधानमंत्री बदलना हमारा काम तो है नहीं, और ना ही मैंने अपनी तरफ से कहा है. ये महाराष्ट्र के मुख्यमंत्री का बयान था, वही हमने लिखा है. आप चाहें तो वीडियो को देख लीजिए. तो कह रहे हैं कि नहीं, वीडियो तो हमने देखा ही नहीं है. यानी उन्होंने वीडियो देखा ही नहीं, और थंबनेल के एक लाइन को देखकर कहते हैं कि ये वीडियो हटा दी जानी चाहिए. मैंने कहा ठीक है, अगर आपको थंबनेल से ही दिक्कत है, वीडियो से दिक्कत है नहीं, क्योंकि आपने देखा ही नहीं है. देखे होते तो ये सवाल ही नहीं होता. तो कहते हैं कि अच्छा अब क्या किया जाए? हमने कहा कि आप बताइए क्या करना है? कह रहे हैं कि आप हम चाहते हैं कि वीडियो हटा दिया जाए. हम कहे कि वीडियो में ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, चूँकि आपने देखा भी नहीं है तो आप कह भी नहीं सकते कि क्यों हटा दिया जाए. तो कह रहे हैं आप थंबनेल चेंज कर दीजिए. हमने कहा क्या चेंज करना चाहते हैं आप? क्योंकि बात तो हमारी यही है, पूरे वीडियो का थीम यही है. तो कह रहे हैं कि अच्छा ठीक है, आप वहाँ पे जोड़ दीजिए कि किसने कहा था, ये बयान किसका है. मैंने जोड़ दिया. लेकिन ये एक तरीका था कि मतलब लगभग मुझे लगता है कि 1 हफ्ते बाद की मीटिंग रखी गई थी. 1 हफ्ते तक हम लोग यही सोच रहे थे कि इस बारे में करना क्या है. एक हफ्ते तक हम यही सोच रहे थे कि इस बारे में करना क्या है, क्या उनको गलत लग गया है। हालांकि फिर भी मैंने वीडियो को, कई लोगों ने कहा कि आप हटा दीजिए, एक वीडियो का मसला है। मैंने कहा मसला एक वीडियो का नहीं है, मसला यह है कि इसमें दिक्कत क्या है, क्योंकि मैं जो भी करता हूँ उसको कई बार वेरीफाई करता हूँ, और मेरी तरफ से जानबूझकर मुझे मालूम है कि हम जो सवाल करते हैं वो किससे कर रहे हैं और उनका कैरेक्टर क्या है, उनका मूल क्या है, तो हमें मालूम है कि हम किससे सवाल कर रहे हैं। तो मैंने वीडियो हटाया नहीं, फिर थंबनेल चेंज करके वो मामला चला गया। अभी पहलगाम के जो मैंने शुरुआत में कहा कि इनका जो मूल मैंने आज तक समझा है पिछले 4-5 सालों में, बहुत लंबा वक्त मुझे नहीं हुआ है और मेरा ये बैकग्राउंड भी नहीं था, मैंने कहीं से ट्रेनिंग या कोई पढ़ाई जर्नलिज्म की नहीं किया है। तो मुझे अब तक जो समझ में आया है कि पिछले 3-4 सालों में जब भी गवर्नमेंट बहुत ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम में होती है, तो वो निशाना बनाती है। अभी हाल ही में जब ये मामला ईरान वाला शुरू हुआ और सरकार इसमें घिरती हुई नज़र आई, तो मैं यही सोच रहा था एक दिन कि आखिर क्या वजह है, अभी तक कुछ हुआ नहीं और इस तरह की कुछ खबरें नहीं आई। तब तक पता चला कि पॉलिटिक्स वाला मामला हो गया, फिर 4 पीएम वाला मामला हो गया। फिर मैं सोच रहा था कि मेरा नंबर नहीं क्यों आया? क्या वजह है, मेरे मेरे लिए इतना प्यार क्यों आ रहा है? और ताज्जुब की बात यह है कि जिस तारीख को मैं ये सब सोच रहा था, 6 तारीख को, उसी तारीख को गुजरात की एक अदालत मेरे खिलाफ आदेश दे रही थी, मुझे मालूम नहीं था। 18 तारीख को मुझे यूट्यूब की तरफ से मेल आता है कि आपके 3 वीडियो डिलीट कर दिए गए हैं और पहले कोई कारण नहीं बताया गया। फिर दूसरा मेल आया, उस मेल में किसी वकील का उसमें पूरा मामला लिखा हुआ था कि आपने डिफेम किया है अडानी ग्रुप को और उसकी वजह से ये वीडियो हटाया जाना चाहिए। 18 तारीख को ये आदेश 6 तारीख का था। 16 तारीख को मुझे अपने पक्ष रखने के लिए बुलाया गया था, लेकिन मुझे मालूम नहीं है कि ऐसा कुछ हो रहा है। 18 तारीख को पता चला, यानी तारीख बीतने के बाद, एक्शन होने के बाद, वीडियो डिलीट होने के बाद मुझे पता चलता है कि मैंने ऐसा कुछ कर दिया है जिसकी वजह से मुझे इस तरह से ऑर्डर आया है। तो ये मसला है। अब उस वीडियो में जो 3 वीडियो मैंने अभी हाल में डिलीट किया गया है, तो मुझे समझ में आया कि दरअसल मुझे मालूम नहीं था, जब वो परेशान हुए तो हमें परेशान किया जा चुका है, देर से मालूम पड़ा। तो कुल मिलाकर मसला ये है कि अभी जो भी ये नियम कानून बनाना चाहते हैं, तो सवाल ये है ही नहीं कि कातिल के हाथ में डंडा है कि तलवार है या फिर कट्टा बंदूक क्या है। सवाल ये है कि कातिल का कैरेक्टर क्या है, वो मारने के लिए ही है। वो जो भी नियम कानून बना रहे हैं, वो उसका टारगेट सिर्फ ये है कि उनके खिलाफ जो सवाल हो रहे हैं, जो आलोचनाएं हो रही हैं, वो ना हो। बाकी हम सब जानते ही हैं कि पूरा सिस्टम, पूरा इकोसिस्टम किस तरह से किसके कब्जे में है और ऐसे में कुछ दिए हैं जो जल रहे हैं, तो उनको बुझाने के तमाम तरीके से प्रयास किए जा रहे हैं। ये 3-4 अनुभव मेरा अब तक का रहा है, जो निशाना बनाया जाता है और कभी-कभी ये भी चीज़ें देखने को मिलती हैं कि आप चाहे जितना प्रयास करिए, जैसे चुनाव से संबंधित जो है 2024 के चुनाव में मैंने एक चीज़ ये भी फ़ील किया था और मैंने लगभग जो आंकड़े आ रहे थे कि कभी भी डेटा बढ़ जाता है वोटिंग का, लाखों-लाखों की संख्या में वोट बढ़ जाते हैं, रात के समय बढ़ जाते हैं, दूसरे दिन बढ़ जाते हैं। तो इससे संबंधित मुझे लगता है मैंने कम से कम 100 वीडियो किया था और कई महीने बाद मैंने देखा कि उनमें से ज़्यादातर वीडियो गायब हैं। ना तो यूट्यूब की तरफ से मुझे कोई मेल मिला, ना ये बताया गया कि क्यों इसको हटाया जा रहा है। मतलब मुझे पता नहीं, अब चूँकि हम लोगों के पास सैकड़ों की टीम नहीं है, 2, 4, 5 लोग हैं और मुख्य कार्य मुझे ही करना होता है। तो इतना समय नहीं है कि मैं रोज़ चेक करूँ कि कौन-सा वीडियो बचा है, कौन-सा डिलीट हो गया। तो सैकड़ों वीडियो मुझे ये महसूस हुआ कि चुनाव से संबंधित, चुनाव आयोग से संबंधित डिलीट कर दिए गए। इसके अलावा कई बार ऐसा भी हुआ जो प्रधानमंत्री को लेकर कुछ सवाल थे, जैसे हमने पुराना आंकड़ा उठा लिया, सवाल कर दिया। इस तरह के बहुत सारे वीडियो डिलीट हुए। और तो और न्यायपालिका से संबंधित भी कुछ वीडियो डिलीट हुए। तो ये है कि बिना बताए, बिना सूचना दिए वीडियो को डिलीट करना, और अभी आप देखिए न्यायपालिका क्या कर रही है। मेरी वीडियो से किसी व्यक्ति को तकलीफ होती है, वो तकलीफ, अच्छा, एक सबसे महत्वपूर्ण बात ये है, जो अडानी वाला मामला मैंने बताया, इसमें वकील ने लिखा है कि डीप फेक है और कोर्ट ने इसको स्वीकार लिया कि डीप फेक है। जबकि उस वीडियो में मैं मौजूद हूँ, जो रिपोर्ट्स हैं सब एक-एक स्टेप मैं दिखाते जा रहा हूँ कि कहाँ से क्या रिपोर्ट है, उसी को मैं समझा रहा हूँ। कुछ भी अपनी तरफ से नहीं है, मगर फिर भी उसको डीप फेक मान लिया जाता है। तो ये बहुत बड़ी समस्या है कि आप किसी भी चीज़ को डीप फेक के नाम पर खत्म कर देंगे, बिना दूसरे पक्ष को सुने, बिना उसकी बात जाने। ये पूरी तरह से फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन के खिलाफ है।
No, this is a problem that we've seen elsewhere also. Okay, Haseen is here. Thank you. सो हम लोग जो बात कर रहे थे कि वो स्पेसिफिक इंसिडेंट, कोई पर्टिकुलर वीडियो जो आपका टेक डाउन हुआ है, और कोई ईमेल और कुछ डॉक्यूमेंटेशन किसने टेक डाउन किया है? जैसे हम लोग बोल रहे थे कि कोई आया ही नहीं है समटाइम्स, राइट, कि पता ही नहीं चला कि 100 वीडियोस डिलीट हो गया है। तो ऐसा आप थोड़ा अगर अपने एक्सपीरियंस के बारे में थोड़ा बताएं।
मेरा सबसे पहला एक्सपेरिमेंट शायद मेरे ऊपर ही हुआ था। बोलता है हिंदुस्तान को 2024 में इलेक्शन से पहले 34 दिन के लिए बैन कर दिया गया इंडिया से, मतलब चैनल ही डिलीट कर दिया गया। उसके बाद तो हर महीने मेरे पास मेल्स आ रहे हैं, कभी ट्विटर की तरफ से आते हैं, कभी यूट्यूब की तरफ से आते हैं। वो मेरे चैनल को, कभी ट्विटर के पोस्ट डिलीट कर देते हैं। कल मेरी बात हो रही थी निखिल सर से, तो अब आप देखिए कि ये ट्विटर की तरफ से मेरे पास 20 अप्रैल को एक मेल आया हुआ है। राजस्थान की पुलिस चाहती है,
पर के
हाँ, राजस्थान की पुलिस चाहती है कि ये एक पोस्ट है मेरा छोटा सा, ये देखिए आप, ये अब दिखा नहीं सकता मैं, लेकिन ये 20 तारीख को मेल आया है मेरे पास कि एक छोटी सी पोस्ट को, जो जो राजस्थान की खबर भी नहीं है, राजस्थान की खबर नहीं है ये। इसमें लिखा हुआ है कि मतलब एक पत्रकार है रणविजय सिंह, उनका एक छोटा सा कोट था। तो मेरी कैटेगरी है सोशल बॉडी, हम लोगों के सोशल मीडिया से कुछ कोट्स उठाते हैं, उनको जगह देते हैं अपने यहाँ। तो उस छोटा सा एक कमेंट था उनका, तो मैंने लिख दिया बस पीएम के ऊपर कि प्रधानमंत्री जो है, पाकिस्तान का प्रधानमंत्री वॉर रुकवाता है और खी 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 करने वाले ट्वीट रुकवाते हैं। मतलब ये नाम भी नहीं है, इसमें नाम भी नहीं है, बस एक छोटा सा ट्वीट है। इसे राजस्थान की पुलिस डिलीट करवा रही है, राजस्थान की तरफ से ये आया हुआ है, राजस्थान पुलिस की तरफ से। तो 2024 में 34 दिन के लिए मेरे यूट्यूब को डिलीट करके रखा गया इलेक्शन से पहले। वो तो उस टाइम पे शायद सरकार, इलेक्शन कमीशन और तमाम चीजें मेरे साथ आ गई, तो हम लोगों को बहाल कर दिया गया 34 दिन बाद। तो मुझे लगता है कि शायद पहला एक्सपेरिमेंट बोलता हिंदुस्तान के ऊपर ही हुआ था। तब उसके बाद 4PM आया, मॉलिटिक्स आया, तमाम और संस्थान लगातार लाइन में लगे हुए हैं, बट हमें तो वापस कर दिया गया 34 दिन बाद।
And it's affecting everybody who's trying to do some form of journalism, I guess. संजय जी, केस में आपको कैसे पता लगा कि कंटेंट रेस्ट्रिक्ट हुई है? बिकॉज अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम दैट वी आर हियरिंग कि शैडो बैन हुई है, कोई ईमेल आया है किसी से, कोई प्लेटफॉर्म से या गवर्नमेंट से, या कोई, या सो आपको कैसे पता चला और आपने क्या किया, अगर थोड़ा बताएं।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आप सभी का कि आपने मुझे आमंत्रित किया। और मेरे संग ये सिलसिला शुरू हुआ 2017 से। तब मेरा अखबार 4PM के नाम से एक इवनिंग अखबार लखनऊ से निकलता था। सरकार बदली, 6 महीने बाद मुझे बुलावा आया सीएम के बड़े करीबी अफसर का। मैं समझ गया क्यों बुलावा आया। मैं एक हाथ पे फाइल लेके पहुंचा। उन्होंने मुझसे कहा कि सीएम बहुत नाराज है आपसे। मैंने कहा क्यों नाराज है? उन्होंने कहा कि हमको लगता है कि आप अखिलेश के आदमी हैं। मैं कही उनको क्यों लगता है? बोले आप हमारे खिलाफ खबर छाप रहे हैं, उनके खिलाफ खबर छाप रहे हैं, इसलिए लगता है। तो मैं वो फाइल लेके गया और मैंने उनको फाइल दिखाई। मैं कहा मुझे पता था आपने क्यों बुलाया है। इस फाइल में अखिलेश यादव के सरकार के खबरें हैं और मैं आपको एफिडेविट लिख के देने को तैयार हूं कि लखनऊ के किसी बड़े अखबार ने जितनी खबरें मैंने समाजवादी पार्टी सरकार के खिलाफ लिखी है, उतनी किसी ने भी लिखी हो तो मैं अखबार बंद कर दूंगा। मैंने उनसे ये भी कहा कि हम सरकारों के खिलाफ नहीं लिखते, हम सरकार जो कमी होती है वो कमी को दिखाते हैं, और ये पत्रकारिता का काम होता है। क्योंकि सरकार जो दिखाती है, बताती है, वो विज्ञापन होता है, जो छुपाती है वो खबर होती है। मुझसे उन्होंने एकदम कहा कि आपको पता है कि सरकार का बजट कितना, 1000 करोड़ रुपया है मीडिया के लिए। हम हर साल आपको 10 करोड़ रुपया देंगे, आप अखबार का पहला पन्ना चेंज कर दीजिए। क्योंकि कभी राहुल गांधी ट्वीट कर रहे हैं आपके पेज को, कभी केजरीवाल कर रहे हैं, कभी और प्रियंका कर दे रही हैं। तो मैंने उनसे हंसते हुए कहा कि देखिए मेरे 4PM को अभी निकले हुए 2.5 साल हुआ है। अमर उजाला, जागरण जैसी अखबार जो है ये 5वीं पीढ़ी है तो अखबार बन पाए, और आप 2.5 साल में लखनऊ से 10,000 से ज्यादा अखबार छपते हैं। सिर्फ 2.5 साल में मेरा अखबार इतना दर्द देने लगा कि आप मुझे बुला के ऐसा कह रहे हैं, तो ये मेरी उपलब्धि है, मैं इसको पॉजिटिव मानूंगा। तो इसलिए मैं इस शर्त पे तैयार नहीं हूँ कि सरकार के खिलाफ लिखा ना जाए। मैं कह कर आया, 24 घंटे बाद एक दरोगा मेरे ऑफिस में आया, एक पर्चा उसके हाथ में था, उसमें खेबीलाल और निवासी झुमरी तलैया, मतलब नाम और पता दोनों फर्जी, इस तरह का एक नाम एड्रेस था। 10 राय लिखी थी कि मैंने बड़ी अकूत संपत्ति कमाई है, जाने कहाँ कहाँ मेरे फार्म हाउसेज हैं, कहाँ बंगले हैं, मैं बहुत लग्जरी गाड़ी से चलता हूँ, 5 स्टार से रुकता हूँ, इस तरह की शिकायत थी। और मेरे खिलाफ आर्थिक अपराध अनुसंधान की जांच सेटअप कर दी गई। 6 इंस्पेक्टरों की टीम बना दी गई। तो मैंने उन अफसर को फोन किया, मैंने कहा कि आप तो मुझे बहुत सालों से जानते हैं, लड़ना मेरे खून में स्वभाव में शामिल है, मैं स्टूडेंट लीडर रहा हूँ, यूनिवर्सिटी के चुनाव लड़ा हूँ, तो मुझे लड़ना बहुत अच्छी तरह से आता है, तो मुझे कोई फर्क नहीं है, आप आराम से जांच कराइए, 6 नहीं 16 इंस्पेक्टर से जांच कराइए। और मैंने कहा एक बात और सुन लीजिएगा, जिनके पास ये काली संपत्ति होती है, अवैध धन होता है, वो सरकारों से लड़ते नहीं है। आप तो मुझे बहुत बड़ा अमाउंट दे रहे थे, लगभग 1 करोड़ रुपए हर महीने दे रहे थे, मुझे कोई बुरे नहीं लग रहे रुपए, लेकिन मैंने कहा था कि मैं बेच नहीं पाऊंगा 4PM को, करा लीजिए जांच। उसके 1.5 महीने बाद 2 गाड़ी भर के लोग आए, मेरे ऑफिस पे हमला हो गया, पूरा ऑफिस तोड़ दिया गया। तब तक मैंने यूट्यूब नहीं बनाया था। जब हमला हुआ मैंने फेसबुक पे लिखा, तो वो खबर अमेरिका के अखबारों में, लंदन के अखबारों में, दुबई के अखबारों में छपी कि एक किस तरह एक सेकुलर जर्नलिस्ट पे हमला हुआ। तो मुझे लगा कि अब यूट्यूब बना लेना चाहिए, क्योंकि अब अखबार जो है वो इवनिंग अखबार है, लखनऊ का है, तो आवाज दूर तक जानी चाहिए। तो मैंने 18 में ये यूट्यूब बनाया, उस पर मैंने बोलना शुरू किया। मुझे उम्मीद ही नहीं थी कि एक नई दुनिया मेरा इंतजार कर रही है। जब 18 पे बोला, उसके हमले के कुछ दिनों बाद एक एसटीएफ के खिलाफ खबर छापी, तो हमारे यहाँ के एडीजी हैं मिस्टर अमिताभ यश, बड़े खूंखार किस्म के एडीजी हैं, लोग उनसे बहुत डरते हैं, टांग पे गोली मारने के वो एक्सपर्ट हैं। एक खबर छापी मैंने, तो उन्होंने क्रिमिनल डिफॉर्मेशन का सूट मेरी मेरी वाइफ, चूंकि अखबार वाइफ के नाम था, दोनों पे दायर कर दिया। उधर से मैसेज आया कि बात कर लीजिए, बातचीत कर लीजिए, खत्म हो जाएगा। हमने कहा कोई बात नहीं है, हम लोग कोर्ट गए, हम और वाइफ दोनों, हम लोगों ने जमानत कराई, वो मुकदमा आज भी चल रहा है। उसके बाद एक दिन संजय सिंह आम आदमी पार्टी वाले सांसद जी मेरे इंटरव्यू ऑफिस में आए, मैंने उनका इंटरव्यू किया। लखनऊ में सरकारी पत्रकारों को मकान मिलता है, अभी भी कम से कम 1000 पत्रकारों को मिला होगा, मुझे भी मिला हुआ था। कमाल खान साहब, स्वर्गीय कमाल खान साहब के बराबर वाला घर मेरा था। संजय सिंह का इंटरव्यू जारी हुआ और उसके 24 घंटे बाद 100 पुलिस वाले लगा के मेरा मकान खाली करा लिया गया। ये सब बातें मैं यूट्यूब पे बोलने लगा कि सरकार कितना प्यार दे रही है मुझे। फिर एक आदेश जारी हो गया कि मेरे अखबार को कोई भी विज्ञापन नहीं देना है। तो मेरे को पिछले जब से सरकार आई है, किसी अखबार को मेरे 1 रुपए का भी कोई विज्ञापन नहीं मिला। मैं मान्यता प्राप्त, यूपी के जो मान्यता प्राप्त पत्रकार एसोसिएशन है उनका वाइस प्रेसिडेंट था। मेरी मान्यता खत्म कर दी गई और मेरे को आज तक सचिवालय पास भी, सेक्रेटरीट पास भी जारी नहीं है। हालांकि जो मान्यता प्राप्त पत्रकार है उसमें से कोई एक पत्रकार को आजीवन कारावास की सजा हुई हुई है, कुछ पत्रकार सब्जी का ठेला लगाते हैं, कुछ पत्रकार भारतीय जनता पार्टी के नेता हैं, वो सब मान्यता प्राप्त पत्रकार हैं, लेकिन मेरे जैसे पत्रकार को वहां पे यूपी में सचिवालय पास भी नहीं। लेकिन ये सब बातें मैं बोलने लगा और फिर यूट्यूब पे मुझे उम्मीद ही नहीं थी, सपने में भी नहीं थी कि रॉकेट की तरह मेरा यूट्यूब बढ़ता चला गया। मैं खुद हैरान था कि यार ऐसा कैसे, इतनी तेजी से कैसे लोग मुझे सुन रहे हैं। फिर मजेदार टर्निंग पॉइंट आया, 2022 के यूपी के विधानसभा चुनाव चल रहे थे। मैंने शाम को 6 बजे एक डिबेट शुरू करी, मैं उसमें लोगों से बात करता था। तो मैं देख रहा था ये गोदी मीडिया के बड़े बड़े चैनल हैं, इनका लाइव नीचे आ रहा था कि लाइव कितने लोग देख रहे हैं। तो देखा मैंने लाइव देख रहे थे, उसमें से किसी चैनल के 3000, ठीक है 6000। और मैंने एक दिन जब डिबेट खत्म करी, उस दिन 6 लाख लोग मुझे देख रहे थे। तो वो मेरे लिए बिल्कुल असंभव था कि 6 लाख लोग डिबेट पर सुन रहे हो मेरे को, मतलब मैंने ट्वीट भी किया वो। उसके बाद अचानक मैं एक दिन उठा तो देखा मैंने कि मेरा चैनल गायब है। मैंने कहा ये क्या हुआ, मैंने यूट्यूब को मेल किया कि चैनल नहीं दिख रहा, लेकिन जवाब नहीं आया। मैं समझ गया, मैंने फेसबुक पे लिखा कि मेरा चैनल हैक कर लिया गया, और मैंने 1 घंटे बाद 4PM यूपी के नाम से नया चैनल बना दिया। तो बहुत सारे प्रेस क्लब ने, देश के अलग अलग राज्यों ने विरोध किया, पॉलिटिकल पार्टियों ने विरोध किया कि इस तरह किसी चैनल को कैसे बंद कर दिया गया। मेरे बहुत अच्छे एडवोकेट हैं, मोहम्मद हैदर, लखनऊ में मेरा बड़ा सपोर्ट करते हैं, बहुत काबिल है। उन्होंने यूट्यूब को मेल किया कि आप भारत की डेमोक्रेसी में किस तरह दखल दे रहे हैं, चुनाव को प्रभावित कर रहे हैं, हम सुप्रीम कोर्ट में इसके खिलाफ रिट करने जा रहे हैं। वो ड्राफ्ट इतना बढ़िया था कि तीसरे दिन यूट्यूब ने गलती मानते हुए मेरा चैनल खोल दिया है, मान लिया कि कहीं कंप्रोमाइज किया गया था। तब तक मैं 4PM यूपी बना चुका था। मैंने कहा मैं इसका क्या करूं, समझ में नहीं आ रहा था। मैंने कहा चलो इसको यूपी की खबरें बना के लिए 4PM यूपी बना देते हैं। तो कभी भी कहते हैं ना कि कोई इंसान आपको बुरा करना चाहता है लेकिन अच्छा हो जाता है। तो नेशनल चैनल के संग मैंने 4PM यूपी बनाया, आज उसके लगभग 19 लाख सब्सक्राइबर हो गए। उसके बाद गुजरात का इलेक्शन आया, मैं गुजरात से बोल रहा था, फिर उन्होंने मुझे नोटिस देना शुरू कर दी, इनकम टैक्स से नोटिस आ गया कि साहब 10 सालों में आपने, आपके परिवार ने, आपने घर में पेंट भी कराया, उसका हिसाब के हिसाब दीजिए। मैंने अपने एडवोकेट हैदर को पकड़ा है कागज, मैंने कहा ये मुकदमा आप लड़िए, मैं चला गुजरात। मैंने 4PM गुजरात लॉन्च कर दिया। मैंने कहा लड़ाई लड़नी है तो फिर मैदान में आके लड़ी जाए। आज 4PM गुजरात के भी 4.5 लाख सब्सक्राइबर खड़े हो गए। फिर मुझे लगा कि चलो फिर लड़ी लिया जाए, तो हर राज्यों में मैं अपना चैनल बनाता चला गया। 4PM यूपी, गुजरात, बिहार, महाराष्ट्र, राजस्थान, कर्नाटक, हरियाणा, पंजाब, दिल्ली। तो एक इन्होंने मुझे रोकने की कोशिश शुरू करी और आज की तारीख में 17 चैनल मैंने खड़े कर दिए। न्यूज़ से अलग हटके भी मैंने 4 PM बॉलीवुड बनाया, मुंबई में शॉर्ट फिल्मों का काम शुरू किया। मुझे लगा कि एक जर्नलिस्ट को जितना क्रिएटिव हो सकता है उतना होना चाहिए। कुछ थिएटर मैंने किए हैं, तो कुछ जगह मैंने आर्ट भी करना शुरू कर दिए, प्ले भी करना शुरू कर दिए। और इसके बाद में ये जितनी कार्रवाई हो सकती थी, इनकम टैक्स की स्क्रूटनी पूरी हो गई। उसके बाद में कुंभ मेले में जब ये कह रहे थे कोई भगदड़ नहीं हुआ, उसी समय मैंने सबसे पहले देश में 10 बजे मैंने लाशें दिखाना शुरू कर दी। मुझे पता था कि क्या हुआ है। मैंने अपने रिपोर्टर क्षितिज को पोस्टमार्टम हाउस पे खड़ा किया और मैंने कहा तुरंत वहां पे जाओ, डेड बॉडी आएंगी। और 10 बजे जब सरकार छुपा रही थी तो 10 बजे से हमने एक एक करके डेड बॉडी गिराना शुरू करी और 10:30 बजे तक सरकार कही थी कुछ नहीं हुआ, हम 32 लाशें दिखा चुके थे। उसके बाद ही प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने ट्वीट करके कहा कि देश को आज दुखद हादसा हुआ। लेकिन सरकार इतनी चिढ़ गई कि उसी एक हफ्ते में 3 लेटर लिखे गए ईडी को कि ईडी मेरी जांच करे। तो मैंने हंसते हुए मैसेज किया, मुझे पता चल गया था लेटर गए हैं, तो मैंने एक काम करिए, रॉ के एजेंट्स को भी वापस बुला लीजिए पाकिस्तान से, उनसे भी मेरी जांच करा लीजिए। तो वो एसटीएफ मेरे पीछे लगी हुई, मैंने होम मिनिस्टर को शिकायत की, मैं एविडेंस के साथ ही एसटीएफ की गाड़ियां मेरा पीछा करती हैं, ईओडब्ल्यू मेरे पीछे लगी हुई, ईडी मेरे पीछे लगी हुई, इनकम टैक्स मेरे पीछे लगी हुई है। मुझे समझ में नहीं आया कि भारत सरकार की कोई और एजेंसी बची है जो मेरा पीछा ना कर रही हो, ना लग रही हो। मैं मजे में इन सबसे फेस करता रहा। चैनल बहुत बढ़िया चलने लगे। फिर पहलगांव का हमला हुआ। इस बीच में एक दिन पार्लियामेंट के चुनाव से पहले, पिछले वाले पार्लियामेंट के चुनाव से पहले मुझे
Sanjay ji, I need to raise up because we are running short of time. So if we can just like.
अगर आपने मुझसे कल ये कहा था कि मैं बता दूं मेरे संग क्या क्या हुआ, तो वो मैं बता रहा हूँ। अगर आप पर्टिकुलर कोई सवाल पूछना चाहे तो वो पूछ लूं, क्योंकि हर सवाल मेरे चैनल से जुड़ा हुआ है या मुझसे जुड़ा हुआ है। वो सब इसलिए प्रयोग मुझ पे हो रहे हैं क्योंकि मैं जर्नलिज्म होकर बोल रहा हूँ। तो मैं वही बता रहा हूँ आपको। यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ मिशिगन से मुझे बुलावा आया कि मुझे वहां बोलने के लिए बुलाया गया है अमेरिका से, और फिर उन्होंने मेरा वीजा अप्रूव होने के बाद 6 महीने तक मेरा पासपोर्ट जब्त रखा। मैंने अमेरिका में लिखा कि मुझे उम्मीद नहीं थी कि आप भी इतना डरते हैं, और मैं न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स और वाशिंगटन पोस्ट के एडिटर को ये शिकायत करने जा रहा हूँ। 6 महीने बाद वीजा कैंसिल करके मेरा पासपोर्ट वापस किया गया। मजे की बात यह है, जब ट्रम्प चचा की और मोदी जी की दोस्ती ज्यादा हो गई दिनों में, तब अमेरिका से मेरे पास मेल आया कि आप अपना ड्रॉप बॉक्स में डाल दीजिए पासपोर्ट। मैंने कहा मैंने तो अप्लाई नहीं किया है वीजा के लिए। बोले नहीं, गलती होगी, आप डाल दीजिए। मुझे बिना बुलाए देश का पहला पत्रकार होगा जिसको बिना बुलाए अमेरिका ने 10 साल का वीजा दिया। इसके बाद में अभी पहलगांव में हमला हुआ। पहलगांव के हमला के बाद में फिर मेरे पास में सुबह मेल आया कि भारत सरकार ने कहा है कि आप एंटी नेशन है, आपका चैनल बंद कर दिया जाए। मेरा चैनल बंद कर दिया गया। अब मैं हैरान, मुझे बुरा ये लगा कि यार बाकी किसी चीज से कर दो, लेकिन एंटी नेशन थोड़ा दिल को दुखा। यार भारत के खिलाफ तो नहीं है, भारत तो हमारी धड़कनों में बसता है। तो हम दिल्ली गए, कपिल सिब्बल जी से मिले। हैदर जी और मोहम्मद तला साहब हमारे एडवोकेट थे। कपिल सिब्बल साहब ने गले लगाया और इतने बढ़िया एडवोकेट, एक पैसा मुझसे लिया नहीं, उल्टे खाना और खिलाया बढ़िया वाला। और सुप्रीम कोर्ट में उन्होंने कहा कि मैं इंटरव्यू किया मेरा, और सुप्रीम कोर्ट में रिट दायर हो गई। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने नोटिस जारी किया कि आप बिना इंफॉर्मेशन के कैसे चैनल बंद कर दिया। और मजे की बात ये, उस समय देश का और दुनिया का शायद ही कोई अखबार या चैनल ऐसा बच जाओ जिसने मुझ पर वीडियो न बनाया हो कि 16 पाकिस्तान के चैनल बंद और एक भारत का सिर्फ अकेला मैं बंद, 4 PM बंद। तो लोग कहते थे कि देखो यार, पाकिस्तान के संग में भारत में संजय शर्मा बंद हो गए। और गूगल ने रिकॉर्ड दिखाया कि उस महीने में सबसे ज्यादा पाकिस्तान में मुझे ही देखा गया। पाकिस्तान के लोग कह रहे थे कौन भाई बंधु हमारा जो हमारे चक्कर में बंद हो गया। हालांकि मैं पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ ही बोल रहा था ऑपरेशन सिंदूर में। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने नोटिस जारी किया कि भाई कैसे आपने बंद किया, बताइए एक हफ्ते के अंदर। तीसरे दिन बिना कुछ कहे मेरा चैनल खोल दिया गया। और छठे दिन सुप्रीम कोर्ट में आके ये सरकार ने कहा कि हमने अपना आदेश वापस ले लिया। दोपहर को 1 बजे इन्होंने अपना आदेश वापस लिया। रात के 1 बजे मैं दुबई पहुंचा और अगले दिन दोपहर को 1 बजे मैंने 4 PM मिडिल ईस्ट लॉन्च कर दिया और ऐलान कर दिया कि तुम जितना भारत में रुकोगे मैं पूरी दुनिया में फैल जाऊंगा। लंदन में भी तैयारी चलेगी। इसके बाद में जब ये आदेश वापस हो गया तो फिर वो एप्स्टीन फाइल नाम का एक जिन्न सामने आ गया। हमने सवाल करने शुरू किए, फिर वो दोबारा से चैनल बंद हो गए। और इस बार सूचना मंत्रालय ने हमको नोटिस, जो पहले वीडियो हटाए उनको हमने बुलाया। और बुलाते ही मीटिंग में, चूंकि वकील ने कहा था अधिकार आप मीटिंग नहीं करते हैं, पक्ष नहीं देते हैं, तो आते शुरू हो गए कि आपको पत्रकार, वो एक बड़े अफसर थे, 6 लोग और थे, बोले आप बहुत पत्रकारिता के नियमों का उल्लंघन कर रहे हैं। मैंने कहा कैसे कर रहे हैं? बोले कि आप बता रहे हैं कि अमेरिका दबाव में आ गया और ईरान जो है वो, हमें ईरान का साथ देना चाहिए, ये गलत है। तो मैंने कहा आपने शायद गलत नंबर डायल कर लिया, किसी गोदी मीडिया के पत्रकार को नहीं बुलाया, जो बुलाया है आपने, या मुझे बुलाया है। और भारत सरकारों को अफसर मुझे बैठ के ये ज्ञान देगा कि मुझे अमेरिका और ईरान के लिए क्या बोलना है, तो मैं सुनने को तैयार नहीं हूँ। और मैं अभी भी कहूंगा कि भारत को ईरान का साथ देना चाहिए, और एक पत्रकार के नाते मेरा पक्ष भी है और अधिकार भी है बोलने का। और मैंने कहा उनसे ये कह दिया कि मैं इसकी रिकॉर्डिंग कर रहा हूँ, मैं इसकी रिकॉर्डिंग वायरल करूंगा कि भारत सरकार किस तरह मुझ पे अमेरिका और ईरान के बारे में कहना चाह रही। वो चिल्लाए कि आप रिकॉर्डिंग नहीं कर सकते। मैंने कहा आपको जहां FIR करानी हो करा दीजिए, मैं बाकायदा आपकी रिकॉर्डिंग कर रहा हूँ, मैं देश को बताऊंगा कि मंत्रालय क्या चाहता है मुझसे। वो मीटिंग छोड़कर भाग खड़े हुए और कल परसों फिर हाई कोर्ट में, दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट में तारीख थी मेरी। एक लंबा चौड़ा एफिडेविट दिया उन्होंने कि मैं भारत के खिलाफ एक वातावरण तैयार कर रहा हूँ। पहलगांव, जिस पहलगांव को लेकर उन्होंने खुद अपना आदेश वापस ले लिया, उसका भी जिक्र है। और मैं भारत की विदेश नीति पर, मतलब मैं उसको पढ़ के मुझे लगा कि यार मेरी शक्ल क्या दाऊद इब्राहिम से मिलती है, जो उन्होंने मुझे दाऊद इब्राहिम टाइप का बना दिया। 28 तारीख को फिर डेट है। इसको जज साहब ने भी ये माना। एक बड़ा अच्छा उन्होंने भी कमेंट किया कि किसी अखबार में अगर कोई खबर छपती भी है जो मानहानि के दायरे में आती है तो अखबार बंद नहीं किए जाते हैं। तो ये पूरा वाक्य था 4PM की जर्नी का, और उस 4PM की जर्नी ने इस मुकाम तक पहुंचा दिया। आप सब जानते हैं कि 3 साल तक लगातार व्यूअरशिप में सबसे आगे रहे हम, और 17 चैनल खड़े करने का श्रेय सरकार को। तो मैं तो दुखी होने की जगह मैं शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूँ सरकार को कि आज मैं जिस मुकाम पे हूँ उसमें मैं, मेरे महान योगी जी, महान मोदी जी का बड़ा योगदान है। ऐसे ही करते ना। एक आप सोचिए मैम कि जीव जंतु उद्यान विभाग का राज्य मंत्री का दर्जा प्राप्त वो आदमी लेटर हेड पर मुझे जान से मारने की धमकी दे रहा है। मतलब ये मैंने कंप्लेंट करी। इस लेवल पे पत्रकारिता करनी पड़ती है उत्तर प्रदेश में।
Okay, I will just move on because we are running out of time and we need to quickly get into the other questions. But कोई numbers है in the sense of जो शुरुआत में कितने होते थे और लास्ट महीने में कितना ब्लॉक हुआ है, कंटेंट टेक डाउन हुआ है, तो आपके हिसाब से मतलब बढ़ गया है पिछले 2, 3, 5 सालों में, क्या कैसे, like you know what would you say?
एग्जैक्ट नंबर तो मैं सॉरी नंबर्स तो मैं कोट नहीं कर पाऊंगा, लेकिन पिछले 1-1.5 महीने में डेली नहीं तो ऑल्टरनेटिव डेज पे कोई ना कोई एक कंटेंट हमारा डिलीट हो रहा है, और खासतौर पे ट्विटर पे डिलीट हो रहा है। जो पेज बैन हुआ है वो मेटा पे हुआ है। एक चीज जो मैं पिछली बार मुझे ऐड करना चाहिए था, मैं बताऊं, जो पेज बैन हुआ था 79(3)(b) रूल के तहत हुआ था, और एफिडेविट मेटा ने 16 तारीख को मेटा ने ये बताया, 28 को पेज बैन होता है, 16 को पहली हियरिंग हो रही है हाईकोर्ट में, जिसमें मेटा के काउंसिल ये कहते हैं कि हमें थोड़ा सा टाइम चाहिए। टाइम उन्हें इसलिए चाहिए था क्योंकि उनको ये पता ही नहीं था गवर्नमेंट की किस एजेंसी ने उनको कंप्लेन दिया है। मतलब उन्होंने पेज इंडिया में बैन कर दिया, उनको नहीं पता कि शिकायत कहां से आई है। अब उन लोगों ने एफिडेविट दिया, जब आज हियरिंग शायद हो गई होगी या हो रही होगी या होने वाली होगी, तो जो एफिडेविट है उसमें जो कारण बताया गया है वो इससे ज्यादा हास्यास्पद है। कारण ये है, अशोक खरात का मामला सब लोग जान रहे होंगे शायद। सरकरवाड़ा पुलिस स्टेशन में अशोक खरात के ऊपर केस चल रहा था। अशोक खरात से रिलेटेड मैंने निकाला तो 10 या 11 कंटेंट हमने पब्लिश किया था, जिसमें GFX ग्राफिक्स भी थे, वीडियोस भी थे, रील्स भी थे, है ना। तो एफिडेविट में ये लिखा है मेटा के काउंसिल ने कि सरकरवाड़ा पुलिस स्टेशन में ये केस चल रही है, और ये ऑब्जर्व किया गया है कि इस केस से रिलेटेड कुछ वीडियोस सोशल मीडिया पे चल रही हैं, और ये आशंका है कि इन वीडियोस का प्रयोग कोई फेक वीडियो बनाने में या मॉर्फिंग करने के लिए यूज कर सकता है, और मॉर्फ्ड वीडियो इन रियल वीडियोस जो है उनसे वो मॉर्फ्ड वीडियोस बना सकता है या फेक वीडियोस बना सकता है और आगे सर्कुलेट कर सकता है। यह आशंका है, इसलिए उन्होंने हमारा पेज बैन कर दिया। मतलब मैंने कहा कोई सेंस तो इस बात में, जो स्टैंड अप कॉमेडियन कहते कोई सेंस है इस बात में, हमें तो नहीं लगी, मेरे को लगी होगी बहुत सारी सेंस इस बात में। एक सिंपल सा सवाल ये है कि एक तो कोई गलती नहीं थी, अशोक खरात का मामला था, अशोक खरात का मामला हम लोगों ने दिखाया, ग्राफिक्स बनाए, रील्स बनाए, और चिल्लिंग इफेक्ट की जो बात होती है ना, अशोक खरात के ऊपर पूरा एक वीडियो स्क्रिप्ट रेडी है, लेकिन मैंने उसको पब्लिश नहीं किया, मैंने उसको शूट भी नहीं किया अभी। ये चिलिंग इफेक्ट है। मतलब ये कह देना कि हम डरते नहीं, और डरते नहीं है, ये तो बार बार कह रहे हैं हम काम करते रहेंगे, लेकिन थोड़ा बहुत इंसान खुद को कई बार कुछ विषयों से अलग कर लेता है कि फिलहाल इस वीडियो को रहने देते हैं, और बहुत सारी चीजें हैं जिन पे हम काम कर सकते हैं। तो वो स्क्रिप्ट रेडी है, लेकिन मैं वो शूट नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ। अशोक खरात वाला जो मामला है, एक पॉइंट जो मैं केवल रखना चाहता हूँ शॉर्टली, वो ये कि मान लीजिए हमने गलत ही कर दिया होगा, मान लेते हैं, तो 8 या 9 या 10 या 11 या 50 या 100 होंगे, तुम 7 साल से मेटा, तो आपको 10 या 11 पोस्ट पे आशंका, और आशंका आपने रियल वीडियो किया, मेरा फर्दर जो फीडबैक स्पेशल चैनल वैनल बंद करना या चैनल वैनल के पेजेस को ब्लॉक कर देना, सस्पेंड कर देना, बैन कर देना,
उसको अगर वो लाइबिलिटी नहीं चाहते आपके तो वो में कुछ फर्क दिखा है? सेंसरशिप नोटिस मिलता है या बिल्कुल नोटिस मिलता भी नहीं है अभी?
बिल्कुल, मतलब नोटिस मिल ही नहीं रहे हैं। बहुत सारी जगहों पे बहुत सारी चीजों के नोटिस नहीं मिल रहे हैं। जैसे हमने अपलोड कर दिया ट्विटर पे, और जैसा कि अंबुश मेरे सबसे नाम था उनका, अंबुश जो बता रहे थे कि अब ट्विटर पे अपलोड कर रहे हैं, पूरे टाइम पे ट्विटर स्क्रॉल नहीं करते रहेंगे कैसा परफॉर्म कर रहा है, क्या चल रहा है, क्या नहीं चल रहा है। जब हमने आधे घंटे बाद चेक किया, मैंने कहा यार ये वीडियो डाला नहीं क्या, तो वीडियो तो डला हुआ है, डिलीटेड आ रहा है। अच्छा, ये कार्टून आज पब्लिश नहीं हुआ, नहीं पब्लिश हो चुका है, डिलीटेड आ रहा है।
स्पीड बढ़ी है क्या?
स्पीड बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ी है।
स्पीड बढ़ी है। अब बढ़ा है कि नहीं बढ़ा है वो
ये अब तो हर रोज तो नहीं, महीने में 4-5 नोटिस आ रहे हैं हर तरीके के। एक्स पे जो पोस्ट है उसमें वीडियोस भी है, आपके पोस्ट भी है।
अच्छा, तो स्पीड बढ़ गई है
बढ़ गई
सबकी। जो जूम पे है वो बताएंगे जरा कि क्या आपकी स्पीड बढ़ी है कि नहीं, होती आई है? अंबुज जी, संजय जी, स्पीड बढ़ी है?
किस चीज की स्पीड?
आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही।
हाँ, मैं
क्या हो गया?
मेरे बीच में ना आपकी आवाज गायब हो जा रही है, एरर आ रहा है शायद।
अच्छा, तो स्पीड बढ़ी है क्या?
मैं सुन नहीं पाया था आपको, आप फिर से सवाल
की
स्पीड की चीज की।
ये जो टेक डाउन हो रहे हैं,
हाँ,
से
पिछले
और
6 महीनों से स्पीड बहुत बढ़ी है। मेरे कम से कम 200 से ज्यादा वीडियो हटा दिए गए होंगे, वो बताते नहीं है वो क्यों हट रहे हैं। एक दिन अचानक उठता हूँ वीडियो गायब। तो स्पीड तो बढ़ा रहे हैं, जो मन में आता है वो बढ़ा देते हैं, जो मन में आता है कम कर देते हैं।
भी बहुत नोटिस भेज रहे हैं डिलीट करने के।
अच्छा, तो यूट्यूब पहले भी नोटिस भेज रहा है,
अब ज्यादा आ रहे हैं, अब तुरंत डिलीट कर दे रहे हैं।
हमें शायद जूम की दिक्कत हो रही है। अगर आपको मेरी आवाज आ रही है तो आप बताइए, आपका स्पीड बढ़ी है कि कम हुई है? आई थिंक जूम हैज
एक और
डिस्कनेक्टेड।
चीज है निखिल सर, मेटा से अगर कोई रिप्रेजेंटेटिव हो तो वो ज्यादा अच्छे से बता पाएंगे, या कोई भी किसी को भी अगर आइडिया हो तो। इंस्टाग्राम जो सस्पेंड हुआ है उसमें अब बहुत सारे लोगों से, जिनसे जैसे न्यूज डिगी से जो मुलाकात हुई, तो कॉपीराइट वायलेशन का मामला था न्यूज डिगी के पास जो मेल आया था। लेकिन जो मेल आईडी थी वो मेल आईडी क्लियरली दिख रही थी कि मतलब फेक जनरेटेड मेल आईडी है, वो कोई यूजर काम कर नहीं रहा था। जिसके नाम से मेल आईडी थी, कि जिसका कंटेंट आपने कॉपीराइट किया है, उसको जब कॉन्टेक्ट किया गया तो उसने कहा कि नहीं भाई मैंने कोई कॉपीराइट क्लेम डाला नहीं है। अच्छा, दूसरा, इंस्टाग्राम कई लोगों को, जैसे हम,
अच्छा, तो नकली कॉपीराइट क्लेम पे भी हो?
जी जी,
अच्छा,
तो नकली कॉपीराइट क्लेम है, उसके बाद फिर सस्पेंडेड अकाउंट जो है वो वापस भी आ गया है, रिकवर हो रहा है। लेकिन वो 10-12-15 दिनों का पूरा एक प्रॉब्लम तो रहा। एल्गोरिथमिकली आपने डाउन कर दिया, और जो बंदा है वो तो हरास हुआ ना, यार करे ना करे। और बहुत सारे लोगों का हो पा रहा है, बहुत सारे लोगों का नहीं हो पा रहा है। और एक और चीज है, जैसे इंस्टाग्राम लगा टू मच एक्टिविटीज, अब कैटेगरी आपने डाला हुआ है न्यूज एंड मीडिया का। अब हम देख रहे हैं, जैसे इंस्टा बॉलीवुड या इंस्टेंट बॉलीवुड नाम से एक प्लेटफॉर्म है, जो मेरे हिसाब से हर 2-3-4 मिनट पे एक पोस्ट अपलोड कर रहा है। तो क्या इंस्टाग्राम का, मतलब मेरी जानकारी में नहीं है, कोई एक लिमिट है कि आप इतने पोस्ट कर सकते हो? क्योंकि
उन्होंने बताया नहीं आपको टू मच एक्टिविटी का मतलब क्या है। आप शायद कुछ ज्यादा ही बोलते हैं।
टू मच,
मैं ऐसे ये पता नहीं कि दिक्कत किसको है, किसको दिक्कत है वो भी आपको पता, क्या ये बताया जा रहा है कि किस, इसमें कॉपीराइट में तो आपको पता लग गया कि किसने फाइल करा है, पर बाकी केसेस में कुछ पता लगा है कि किसने फाइल करा है, किसने कंप्लेंट डाली है, उसका कुछ पता नहीं?
कोई आइडिया नहीं है। मैं तो इसे टू मच डेमोक्रेसी से थोड़ा सा रिलेट करके देश रहा देश में टू मच डेमोक्रेसी हमारे
वेरी लिटिल टाइम है, बट एनीवन हैज एनी क्वेश्चंस इन द रूम?
जी,
Hi, I'll be quick and then, we can take questions. So there are two things I want to raise. There are mostly Hindi content over here. So percentage wise, regional media is more affected or English media is more affected. That's point number one. And taking forward your claim कि आपने जो बोला कि आपको notices आते ही नहीं है और जो हाई कोर्ट में चर्चा हो रही थी आपको पता भी नहीं था. So we have to find a way कि आपके जो कंटेंट की चर्चा हो रही है टू बी टेकन डाउन, आपको और कुछ नहीं तो इत्तला तो हो, सो यू कैन एटलीस्ट डिफेंड योरसेल्फ एंड डिफेंड योर कंटेंट.
जो हाईकोर्ट में जो मसला चल रहा है वो तो पेज बैन का चल रहा है, जो इंडिया में बैन हुआ है उसके लिए तो प्रॉपर नोटिफिकेशन आया था, कोई मेल वगैरह नहीं आया था. सीधा हम लोग सुबह उठे, रात के 2-3 बजे का नोटिफिकेशन है फेसबुक का, वो नोटिफिकेशन था. मेल आईडी पे कोई मेल नहीं आया हुआ है हमारे पास, तो ऑब्वियसली नोटिफिकेशन तो मिलना चाहिए. मतलब पॉइंट ये है कि आप किसी को दिक्कत है इसकी वजह से कंटेंट हमारा हट रहा है, सरकार को लग रहा है अनलॉफुल है, उसने मेटा को बोल दिया, मेटा का मैकेनिज्म एक्जेक्टली. हाँ, मतलब आपको दिक्कत है तो हमसे बात तो कर लो भाई, दिक्कत क्या है, हम अपना पॉइंट रखेंगे.
मैडम एक बात मैं एक बार के बीच में सॉरी इंटरफेयर करना चाहूंगा कि मजे की बात यह है कि सिर्फ हम तक ही सीमित नहीं होते. हमारी एंकर है एक फिजा, उसने इंस्टाग्राम पे रील डाली कि 4 PM क्यों बंद किया गया, 1 घंटे में 20 लाख लोगों ने देखा और तुरंत गवर्नमेंट ने हमारे एंकर की भी इंस्टाग्राम की रील बंद कर दी. फेसबुक पे पेज पर 1-1 करोड़ व्यू आने लगे थे, तो इनकी तरह नीरज की तरह हमारा फेसबुक भी बंद कर दिया गया 4 PM का. तो जो प्लेटफॉर्म आप दिखाएंगे वो प्लेटफॉर्म बंद कर दिया जाएगा. इनका कहना ये है. ट्विटर का पिछले 2 साल से शैडो बैन कर रखा है मेरे को. 50,000 से ऊपर मेरे सब्सक्राइबर नहीं जाने देते. जैसे 51,000 होता है 4 दिन बाद वो फिर 49,000 हो जाता है. तो जो भी प्लेटफॉर्म होगा ना उस प्लेटफॉर्म में बढ़ने नहीं देंगे ये लोग.
मेरे केस में मैं एक चीज ये जोड़ना चाहूंगा. मैंने पिछले 2-3 सालों में ये फील किया है कि इनका फोकस एक तो है कि कंटेंट को रोकिए, लोगों तक पहुंचे नहीं. दूसरा ये है कि चैनल का जो आर्थिक पोजीशन है उसको बराबर टारगेट किया जाए. जैसे मैंने बताया कि बहुत सारे चुनाव संबंधी वीडियो डिलीट कर दिए गए, तो उसी तरह से सैकड़ों ऐसे वीडियो थे जिनको 10 दिन, 15 दिन, 20 दिन या 1 महीने बाद डिमोनेटाइज कर दिया गया. तो ये भी एक बड़ी समस्या है. साल 2024 के चुनाव के दौरान मेरा जो फेसबुक पेज है लोकहित इंडिया, अभी उस पे 9-9.5 लाख के आसपास फॉलोअर है, उसको डिमोनेटाइज कर दिया गया. मुझसे बैंक वगैरह के डॉक्यूमेंट मांगे गए थे और चुनाव के दौरान मैं देख ही नहीं पाया कि ऐसा कुछ मांगा गया है. 3 महीने का समय था, मैंने उसको देखा नहीं और वो पेज आज तक डिमोनेटाइज है. मैंने कई बार प्रयास किया कि जो डॉक्यूमेंट चाहिए मैं देने के लिए तैयार हूँ, लेकिन वहाँ कोई ऑप्शन नहीं है कि आप उसको दोबारा अपना डॉक्यूमेंट सबमिट करें और अपनी बात रखें.
एक इंटरनेट पे चीज बोलते हैं कि टॉक टू द हैंड. ईमेल का वही है कि आप ईमेल करो, होगा नहीं होगा कुछ पता नहीं होता, क्योंकि आप किसी से बात नहीं कर सकते. पर किसी को आपसे बात करनी है तो वो आपको ऑफिस बुला लेते हैं.
उसमें जैसे नोटिस का आप पूछ रहे थे मैम, अभिसार शर्मा जी ने एक वीडियो बनाया था अभी, और यूट्यूब पे उसका थंबनेल था झाल मुड़ी खाएंगे मणिपुर नहीं जाएंगे, झाल मुड़ी खाएंगे मजदूरों का दर्द भूल जाएंगे. ये वीडियो यूट्यूब पे था, फेसबुक पे यही वीडियो अपलोड किया गया, कैप्शन यही था झाल मुड़ी खाएंगे मणिपुर नहीं जाएंगे, और तुरंत ही एक स्क्रीनशॉट है मेरे पास, द पोस्ट इज अनअवेलेबल इन इंडिया, दिस इज बिकॉज वी कंप्लाइड विद अ लीगल रिक्वेस्ट टू रिस्ट्रिक्ट दिस कंटेंट.
तो इसी बारे में हम आगे बात करेंगे कि ये रिक्वेस्ट लीगल है कि नहीं है, क्योंकि अब आपकी कहानियां सबने सुन ली है. एक वहां पे प्रश्न वो पूछेंगे, पर मैं बता रहा हूँ कि आपने जो कहानियां हमें बताई, जो आपने अपनी कहानी बताई है, वो बहुत जरूरी है, क्योंकि अब जो लॉ के बारे में बात करेंगे वो उस समझ से बात करेंगे कि एक्चुअली ऑन ग्राउंड हो क्या रहा है. क्योंकि लॉयर्स का प्रॉब्लम है कि वो लॉ देखते हैं, हमारा प्रॉब्लम है कि हम लॉ और पॉलिसी देखते हैं. जो आप फेस कर रहे हो वो सिर्फ आप और आपके ऑडियंस जानते हैं.
Hello. So
Louder, please.
hello.
We can hear you, but louder.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask. अभी आपने जो बात की वो पब्लिक प्लेटफॉर्म जैसे यूट्यूब, इंस्टाग्राम, इस सब पे, तो आप लोग कुछ मतलब आई मीन बियॉन्ड दिस, मतलब P2P जैसे टेलीग्राम हो गया या इनक्रिप्टेड जो होता है, जिसमें शायद होपफुली गवर्नमेंट सेंसरशिप इतनी पॉसिबल भी नहीं हो, क्योंकि मतलब वो किसको नोटिस भेजेंगे या इस टाइप से कुछ, तो उसका भी कुछ आप लोग देखते हैं कि मे बी यू विल एक्सपैंड इनटू टेलीग्राम और एक्सपैंड इनटू मे बी व्हाट्सएप, समथिंग लाइक दैट, which is more peer to peer and not necessarily a platform where notices can be arbitrarily sent, something like that.
सर इसमें मतलब टेक्निकली या लीगली मुझे बहुत ज्यादा आइडिया तो नहीं है, लेकिन मैंने जैसे पहले बताया था, यूट्यूब, फेसबुक, इंस्टाग्राम या ट्विटर, ये सब हमारे लिए तो एक ब्रांडिंग प्लेटफॉर्म है। हमारा अपना इन हाउस जो है www.analytics.in, जो हमारा अपना यूआरएल है, एनालिटिक्स का एंड्रॉइड एप्लीकेशन है, जो हमारा अपना एप्लीकेशन है। लेकिन मुझे ये लगता है, अब ये अगले सेशन में शायद और क्लियर हो सके जब मैं क्वेश्चन पूछूंगा भी कुछ, कि जब इंटेंशन ये हो कि there is someone who want to kill the idea to question, तो वो सब भी कितना सेफ है जो हमारा अपना प्लेटफॉर्म है, ये मुझे बहुत ज्यादा आइडिया है नहीं। और व्हाट्सएप को लेकर भी कुछ चीजें सामने हैं, जैसे मेरे साथ तक नहीं गुजरा है, अशोक तंवर, जो प्रीवियस कांग्रेस चीफ हरियाणा के, फॉर्मर कांग्रेस चीफ, उनका फोन आया कि यार अगली बार जब बात हो ना इसका तो बोलना कि मेरा भी व्हाट्सएप जो है वो बैन हो गया था। ठीक है, अभी पंकज श्रीवास्तव है, उनके साथ एक शो हम लोग करते हैं वीकली, द थर्ड आई, तो उन्होंने ये जो काला टीका बताया था नरेंद्र मोदी ने, जो स्टालिन वगैरह विरोध कर रहे थे डिलिमिटेशन बिल का, उसको काला टीका बोला था। तो काला टीकावाद पे एक जबरदस्त टिप्पणी उन्होंने एक वेबसाइट के लिए की थी, वो ब्रॉडकास्ट ग्रुप में ब्रॉडकास्ट कर रहे थे, और ब्रॉडकास्ट करते उनका व्हाट्सएप जो है वो रिस्ट्रिक्ट हो गया, 24 घंटे के लिए रिव्यू में चला गया। ब्रॉडकास्ट फीचर जो है व्हाट्सएप का अपना फीचर है ना, मतलब हम सब लोगों का अपना अपना ब्रॉडकास्ट ग्रुप होता है। तो उससे
ये बात व्हाट्सएप से पूछने वाली है, क्योंकि जो कंटेंट है वो कहते हैं वो कंटेंट देख नहीं सकते, राइट? तो अगर ब्रॉडकास्ट पे या तो फिर ऐसा हो कि इतना ब्रॉडकास्ट करा कि उस हिसाब से टू मच एक्टिविटी करके निकाला हो, तो वो हो सकता है, पर कंटेंट देखना वो हमें पता नहीं। बट हमें नेक्स्ट सेशन शुरू करना है, तो थैंक यू। और अगर आप हमारे साथ जुड़े रहेंगे बाकी की बातचीत सुनने के लिए तो बहुत अच्छा रहेगा, क्योंकि अब आपको कुछ ज्यादा ही लीगल बातें सुनाई देंगी, उसको टॉलरेट कर लीजिएगा, हम कोशिश करेंगे कि वो सब समझ पाए। So I would like to invite Aditi to, and let's start with the next session. Sorry, we don't have time for a break, but thank you all for coming in for this. I hope this was new and news for you. We learned new things. So सबसे ज्यादा सवाल तो सर आपसे ही है। कैसे we should, I want to know about it. How can they report what's right?
Nikhil, shall we begin? Okay, I'm going to take an executive decision like the government of India and just begin. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aditi Agrawal. I'm going to moderate this second session on the implications of the proposed Rule 3.4. Rule 3.4 that was proposed by the government of India on March 30 basically says that all advisories, clarifications, etc., issued by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology will be binding. And if all intermediaries, not just social media intermediaries, but all intermediaries, if they do not comply with them, with those advisories issued, then they stand to lose their safe harbor, which is essentially protection from liability for third-party content. So that is something that we are going to discuss today. On the panel, we have Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari, who was the former group coordinator of Cyber Laws Division. And I believe you were the longest serving designated officer for Section 69 there. Okay. We have Vasudev, who is now at...
Just representing myself.
Okay, he's representing himself. We have Tosha, who's from CCG NLU Delhi. We have Rahul, who's from MeitY Law. And we have Snehashish, who has his own tech policy firm. Tech policy firm called TechNiti, but for the longest time he was at Meta. So all the brickbats that journalists in the first panel had, head them that way or this way. Don't hit me with anything. Okay, without further ado, also I hope everyone understands sarcasm, because the government of India often does not. So I'm just assuming.
That's very well.
So please use the... I don't want to stifle your speech in any way. Does it?
I believe, I mean, listening to all the people, that they understand it very well.
Do you take it well?
That we will discuss it.
Yeah, so I'll begin with that question itself. This is something that Neeraj pointed out in the first panel. That's what I heard about the aim. That when it comes to any kind of blocking orders under Section 69A or takedown notices, which are now called reasoned intimation under Section 79(3)(b, read along with Rule 3(1)(d) of IT rules, if the aim is to kill questions being asked, not people, kill questions that are being asked, then what is the point of the entire process? So I want to understand from you, what was the intent behind amending IT rules 2011, the process that started in 2018, somewhat culminated in 2021, and then just continues on and on and on like a bad dream? So what was the intent then? How has it evolved?
So prima facie, everybody knows that within the IT Act, there are two sections, namely Section 69A and 79(3)(b, which deal with content takedown. 69A primarily focusing on blocking, and at the time the Act was written, it was maybe assumed that it is under the control of something which ISP will be able to control, and hence the word blocking. And under 79, the word is takedown because the content is in the control of that particular platform. And hence, the platform is being asked to take it down so that it is not available. And of course, with the change of time, technologies, now it's possible that the content is taken down within the country or globally. Both the things are possible, but when we say blocking, it only happens within the country. Having said so, 69A is for very restricted grounds, not even completing, 19.2, it's only very limited. And the process per se, because I can only talk about the process and not about the systemic problems in the process. So process-wise, for each state, there is a nodal officer, there is a touch point, and for ministries which are likely to be impacted because of such content and which have a national security aspect, those are also the ministries which have got their own nodal officers. So courtesy these nodal officers, the requests are received, are processed. Committee meeting is called, which is also 5 joint secretaries of senior level from different ministries, including from law and Department of Law and Justice, Department of Legal Affairs. Decision is finally approved by secretary, and hence per se, and then there is a cabinet secretary also at that level. Also, there is a provision for review on a 2-month basis. So per se, checks and balances are there. And if somebody has been called for 69A meeting and appearance in 69A meetings, normally we do not know as to whose account it is, because we have no powers within the to who is the user. Problem, please understand that sometimes the user is from within India, but most of the time user is from outside India. In any case, and those are the problem points. In any case, you don't know the person, and therefore you can at best communicate to the platform that you may like to call the person, you may like to not call the person, inform the person. Calling is normally based on the court orders, and in many scenarios, which is impacting sovereignty, integrity, security, or such kind of issues, sometimes you may prefer not to even call the person. I mean, it's a practical problem. 79(3)(b is a distributed function focusing on the unlawfulness, and precisely because there is a misuse potential, because it's being used by so many people, precisely because of misuse functions, that we always had been emphasizing that this power be restricted only to certain limited people.
And courtesy 2025 amendment, 26 now proposed amendments. That has also been done. The level has definitely been escalated. It's only joint secretaries in the ministries, or wherever joint secretaries are not there, directors, or in police it is DIG and above. That means they should be suitably notified first. The whole idea, therefore, is that the kind of misuse which is possible should be done if it is being done, or otherwise that it is not happening, but the power should be available only with certain limited number of people, and they should be accountable in the system if they believe that something which is unlawful is required to be, for which notice is required to be issued. Now, having said so, I believe that if you receive a mail, maybe through I4C, Sahyog or otherwise, that I am writing it on behalf of Office of Delhi Police Commissioner. Now, this is somewhere, this is where maybe platforms also need to take notice that is it the Commissioner of Delhi Police who has been empowered, or anyone in their office who has been empowered? Second, which I have said is that this is an electronic document, does not require a signature. But this is something, it's not a public communication. It's a serious communication of maybe unlawful thing which has been taken into cognizance, for which there are again some checks and balances have been made. Should it not be signed by the person who has been so duly empowered? That means touch point should continue to remain limited. Hopefully those things, if they happen, maybe to a large extent, this problem which was being communicated can be curtailed. But the problem which was otherwise stated just in the previous session was not a legal problem. It's a political problem.
So that's a wonderful note to end on. It's a political problem. But the reason laws exist is to also hold those in so this is for you, is to hold those in the political sphere accountable and those in the executive sphere accountable. You mentioned that some of the accountability measures have been included in the Section 79(3)(b) process through amendments to Rule 3(1)(d). Just for general information, 3(1)(d) was amended in end of October and November 2025, which is when the language around reasoned intimation was introduced, and that police officers or bureaucrats only above a certain level can send it. And at that time, the amendment said that only one officer from every authorized department, agency, or appropriate government, can send the notice. However, there was a subsequent amendment to it. This was in the Feb 10 amendments, the deepfake amendments. That is where Rule 3(1)(d) was amended again to empower more officers, that more than one officer in police departments or appropriate government can exist. So, do you think, now what you have highlighted is that Section 69A, higher threshold, very specific reasons, national security, defense of India, sovereignty of the state. But the fact of the matter is that Rule 3(1)(d) also lists the 669A reasons, along with 3 reasons of defamation. I think one is obscenity or immorality, and the most problematic one, which is violation of any law for the time being in force. Yes, that mouthful. So then anything and everything comes under the sun. And one of the problems that we have seen, and I have specific example here, is that depending on the mood of the government, the police, the state government, they can use either. For instance, content related to Khalistani movement, which in the past was always subjected to 69A. So you have the entire process that Sir just laid out, where a nodal officer from the state government or from the police will come to the designated officer that, hey, this is problematic content, it is affecting public order, etc. Let's convene the meeting. Or if it's too urgent, then emergency blocking order. Because it's Khalistani content probably happening outside India, you can't actually call those people. Fine, they are not given a chance for hearing, and a blocking order, 69A blocking order is issued. But Twitter, in its Twitter now X, in one of its submissions in the Karnataka High Court, challenging the use of 79(3)(b) to implement this kind of takedowns, cited some orders where I4C, the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, which is not a part of 69A, had also issued 1793B takedown notices for Khalistani content and cited national security. So you have the same kind of content being subjected to varying degrees of accountability processes, procedures. How do we account for that?
Yeah, definitely there is an amount of overlap in these two sections. But the focus in 69A is in respect of the impact rather than on the unlawfulness. In 79, the focus is on the unlawful, and therefore you have to actually quote the law, why you consider it to be unlawful, and why you have the right agency in respect of that law. So if those three things are not there in the notice technically is incomplete. So that's how it is. As far as requests being received from I4C, I4C is a coordinating agency, it's an aggregator. The request must have been received by I4C from someone who is per se authorized. Therefore, actually, beyond two observations which I had communicated, maybe one more observation is that the way this rule has been written, maybe at MeitY, at the end of the day, MeitY is supposed to be the administrator of the IT Act. There should be a consolidated list of such notifications which should be made available. Or maybe because I4C is the aggregator and is the single point of conduit. So maybe there also, the same list should continue to be available so that at least people know as to whether you are authorized or not, by which notification, and whether it is within the law or not. Why I'm saying so is because in 2021, when it was issued, maybe there was no such concept of who is authorized. We had only mentioned authorized. We expected maybe notifications to come up. Notifications did come up in 2022, 2023, and maybe in Delhi Police, for example, 23 officers at the DCP level and higher were declared as a nodal officer. In Karnataka, it was maybe ACP in some areas, and then DSP also for some maybe lower or district level, or maybe even
I think Haryana was
going down. So there were good number of officers, while in Bihar they chose to have only one, I'll say, nodal officer. So because of such discrepancy, it is good that at least in 25, the number of touch points have been reduced, have been kept is supposed to be much more responsible now. But either way, if that was the position earlier, after 2025, I believe those notifications also need to be reviewed, once again to be made available. That has not been done.
Got it. Just I4C was actually notified under Section 793 in 24. But something that you said, that intermediaries now need to assess the legality of notices. And from my interaction with the police, with MeitY officials, with intermediaries, that is something that we're doing all this while. But as you pointed out, if it's issued from the office of the Delhi Police Commissioner, for instance, and now because of the amendments that were made on February 10 and brought into effect on February 20, intermediaries just have 3 hours to act on a takedown notice. Are those 3 hours enough? After you, I want Snehashish to come in because he's dealt with them. I'm assuming he's dealt with them at Meta.
Yeah. So 3 hours basically mean that you have to see at the completeness of the notice, the competency of the person who is actually issuing it, authorization of this person, and the sections of the law which is being quoted. Is the person actually authorized for that law, or maybe you are dealing with some other law, but you are pointing unlawfulness in some other statute. So maybe on these 3 things, if you are okay, maybe government's expectation is further do not look into contents, because that is where a responsible officer of the government has already done that due diligence. Beyond this, once again, I like to make one suggestion that because now that there are so many touch points, from a user's perspective, from a maybe a person who has been impacted or is likely to be impacted, the person should get to know where this person now needs to approach in case he is or she is aggrieved because of this decision.
Got it. Snehashish, do you want to come in? Are 3 hours enough to assess the legality of 79(3)B notice?
Said yes.
MediaNama not censoring you because you're ex-Meta. Here's another mic.
No, I'm going to ignore that sarcasm and start with perhaps a disclaimer that I don't represent Meta or any of its subsidiaries, so on and so forth. While I did work there for a while. On this 3-hour question, directly jumping into that, there has been content which has been removed platforms voluntarily within 3 hours. And today, but that voluntary understanding was made in 2019 before the general elections. And this was particularly the case of campaign silence violations. And this was a voluntary code of ethics which was entered into a bunch of platforms led by IMEI, which is the Industry Association, and the Election Commission. Of course, there were laws in the room, and they called it, within 3 hours it will be acknowledged and processed, and we say that it will be action per se. But there was action which happened within 3 hours. And there was a general rationale behind it, right? The rationale is twofold. One, you are trying to take down content, and from what Maheshwari was saying, that there is content which can be judged or reviewed, but there is a binary decision. So if you are saying a content violates campaign silence, then it either has the sign of a political party or any of the photographs of a political leader or any other reference to the political party. It's quite easy for a platform to make that decision. Why 3 hours? Because a campaign silence is 48 hours. It runs, so if it's at 5 p.m. on a particular date, so the campaign silence starts 48 hours before that. This is section 126 of the Representation of People's Act. Therefore, if you wait 3 hours or whatever timeline, it's a adverse impact. So if it's 48 hours is where the campaign silence is, at least you remember within 3 hours. So there has been. So I'll draw from this particular example, talk about 3 things. One, there could be a legitimate rationale. It could be necessary and proportionate, and necessary and proportionate for content restrictions is pretty much accepted globally. So if you go back to the principles, then you know that FAIR, if I'm not mistaken, talks about this and says that content restrictions have to be necessary and proportionate per se. So I think that's pretty much where I will move the conversation and take it up further. So there might be situations where 3 hours might be warranted, is perhaps what I'm saying.
So a couple of points there. With a voluntary code of ethics, it's a very restricted law. Oh, sorry. It's a very restricted law. We are essentially talking about Representation of People Act and very well-defined violations. But when we're talking about something like Rule 3(1)D, it is all Indian law and violation. In that context, are 3 hours enough? That's one. And the second thing there is, VCE, the Voluntary Code of Ethics with the Election Commission, was not legally binding, something that Election Commission also acknowledges. And now that it's been reduced to 3 hours through Rule 3(1)D, EC officials are pretty happy that, hey, our Code of Ethics now has the force of law, even though they might not be specifically notified under 79(3)B. So what happens there? And what kind of power would say something like Voluntary Code of Ethics, if issued by MeitY, the IT industry now has, if the first rule 3.4 comes into force. Snehashri shall come to you first and then Vasu you.
Thanks for that. So, couple of things I will try to draw upon, try to sort of build an understanding around the censorship apparatus which exists within the government. So you do have 92. So if you see the buckets under 92, the ones which are missing when it comes to 69A are public decency and morality, defamation, contempt of court. And an interesting change, and I have had the question for a while. From government to answer, which is to say that 69 says incitement to a cognizable offense. So if there is any content which is an incitement to a cognizable offense, then it falls under 69A. But the 92 is any offense. It doesn't say cognizable offense. So I think quite a lot of thinking had gone into carving out 69A per se. And given that situation, there has to be some level of standard operating procedures discussion to say where 69 has to be used by the government and where 79.3b needs to be used. Of course, when we are talking about 79.3b, not every content needs to be taken down in 3 hours. There has to be some gradation. There could be really harmful content which needs to be taken down in 3 hours. There could be less harmful content which needs to be looked at. But overall, I think if there has to be one silver bullet when it comes to 79 versus 69A, is transparency. And I think that's where the government should look at and focus on, because one thing which Shreya Singhal did with 69A was to talk about how the notice needs to be given to the user. But at the same time, 69A rule 16 talks about strict confidentiality, about the request, the complaint, but the communication as well as the action taken thereof. So an employee doesn't know what to do. So one does the Shreya Singhal said, okay, where available the user needs to be given to the notice needs to be given to the user. But at the same time, if you look at the rule which was never read down, rule 16 asks the intermediary to maintain strict confidentiality. So in that process, it's a bit of a murky situation. But one interesting piece which is lacking in 79.3b, and fortunately so, is that there is no strict confidentiality requirement. And therefore, more transparency there in various forms and based on the existing data in terms of the number of requests sent, various types of requests sent, one can actually try to figure out a graded approach in terms of a spectrum of harmfulness. Like you can put at one end, you can put CSAM or terrorist content or whatsoever, and at the other end you can put like a defamation issue as well. So you can have quite a graded approach when it comes to that.
Ashish, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but you're talking about this gradation of response time. But the delegate legislation does not allow for that. It's clear, 3 hours. So where is that graded thing coming from? Like if you have in your experience, or maybe not in your experience, but when an intermediary gets a 3-hour takedown request, takedown intimation, if it takes 3 hours, 1 minute versus 6 hours versus 24 hours, what will happen?
It depends, right? And the additional criteria which comes into picture and government should come in, right? And there have been discussions between and government issues, and there should be certain other criteria that should come into picture, right? So if you are actually delivering a piece of content which has 3 likes and it has been posted in 2010 or 2015 versus something which has, I don't know, really high engagement and it is increasing minute by minute, and perhaps can lead to.
So where does this discussion happen in the 79.3b paradigm?
So it doesn't, but it has to happen.
Are 3 hours enough to have a discussion? Like, can Mr. Maheshwari call you and say, hey, 3 hours, come here right now, and we need to sort out 1,000 pieces of content immediately?
No, so these need to be predefined, right? So it needs to be defined earlier that, okay, if this kind of content has this kind of virality and therefore it needs to, so that justification needs to be built in, and there has to be predefined SOPs for for that to happen. And I'm going to again upon the fact of necessary and proportionate, and that's the very principle one has to look at. That if it is necessary to block something within 3 hours, and it is a proportional response, then it should happen.
Does a deep fake, well, it was technically not a deep fake, it was a cheap fake, of the ICC chairperson with the owner of one of the IPL teams in a swimming pool, not doing anything but just standing. Is that something that needs to be taken down within 3 hours to protect the reputation of well-respected Indian families?
I don't know.
It's one of the notices I had sent to Twitter.
I don't know.
Okay, cool. Basu, I'll come to you and then to Sir. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're looking at, we've dived really deep into the law. And I think that's maybe the wrong way to think about this. Just maybe take a step back and think about the asymmetry between users and the government in this situation, right? The government can, by notification with no transparency, right, for almost any content on the internet, block your content, right? And you don't know why it's blocked. You don't know who to approach, right? If the government tried to do this in the physical world, if they tried to arrest you, there'd be judicial oversight. You'd have to be brought before a magistrate within 24 hours. If the government wanted to take over your business, there'd be a legal court order. They need a legal court order to do that, right? But with respect to speech, we seem to have accepted that the government can just block speech like this, right? Any police officer above a certain limit, right? That's what the 3 criteria mentioned by Maheshwari sir. The seniority of the official, the veracity of their signature. That's what we're looking at, right? We're not talking about anything else, but we're accepting that that's enough to block speech, right? And as we've heard on the first panel, it's not individual random posts with 3 likes only, right? It's entire businesses that are being blocked effectively, right? So this is the first question that we really need to ask ourselves, is this the paradigm we want to operate in the first place, right? And with respect to the 3 hours, I mean, I completely agree with Snehashish in that the reason that 3 hours is there is because the government says, look, there might be extreme content, which we need to block in 3 hours. Say I have a mass shooting and a video of a mass shooting, right? It's like horrific and we don't want it to spread because it could be used to, recruit terror cells or something like that. Maybe we need to get that down immediately, right? But as soon as you start clubbing this content with the defamation content, right? Then you're in a situation where any police officer above a level of seniority can start issuing notices and platforms are swamped with content, right? So I agree that you need that gradation, but I think that with respect to, I mean, there's maybe like a small, narrow sliver of content where we need to take it down within 3 hours. But with respect to anything else, I don't know if we should be accepting this paradigm at all. Right? Why should the government be able to block speech with no oversight, no judicial oversight, right? And nobody knows who to approach, right? I don't think we should accept that paradigm.
That's fair. After, because, okay, yeah. So you had something to say.
Oh, I just also wanted to add that in case of 69A, we had developed a very well SOPs, which was shared with the concerned platforms as to when do you take an individual post versus an account. Something similar should also be there in respect of 79 3B as well. I mean, so 31D also, as to how do you decide an individual post, individual video versus a complete channel or a complete account. Criteria need to be clear, and criteria are clear and should be made clear.
Okay.
Doesn't probably exist in 79.3.
Rahul, I wanted to come to you. So that point and a question for you. We've been talking about how the delegated legislation, which is the IT rules, essentially apply to all content and any reason. So there is a certain ad hocism involved. With the proposed rule 3.4, how much worse is it going to get?
Yeah. Just building a little bit on some preliminary questions, I think on speech particularly, the adjudication of speech is by and large a judicial function. What can be said as a constitutional right is protected by the judiciary primarily. The executive in that paradigm, as Vasu says, you can challenge this. The remedy that is provided in the law is a challenge in court. The problem is that in the current ecosystem that you live in, there is a requirement for decision-making, an evaluation of speech being made at multiple levels. If you actually look at what the government has been arguing, and the government has been arguing in court, it's actually quite interesting. And you mentioned the X judgment. 79 is actually portrayed as the manifestation of actual knowledge as described in Shreya Singhal. It is not intrinsically a blocking power. What was argued was to say that this is the government telling an intermediary that there is unlawful content on your platform. Now the ball is in your court to decide whether you would like to make a decision and take down that content, or you would like to keep that content above. That was the paradigm in which 79.3 has manifested. Otherwise, simply saying if they are both taking down content, what is the difference between the two provisions? Why do you need two provisions to do the same thing of law is something that is to be questioned. The problem that now comes in on a 3R, when you frame it in that context, 3Rs to make an evaluation of speech, questions arise on one, and should the person in the first place be making an evaluation of speech? And that becomes very interesting for intermediaries, the role of intermediaries that they play over there. The second question is on what speech evaluation. Speech is a very subjective thing. The Constitution is actually quite clear on what is protected speech and what is actually not. The point is simply that in 3Rs, what you are asking an intermediary to do is not apply their mind. And it is why 3Rs versus 24 hours does make a difference. It is not simply about saying, is the notice valid, which is what Rakesh Maheshwari sir was talking about in terms of signature, etc., etc. But for instance, if there is something to claim that this is a defamatory post, should the intermediary be sitting in that position to decide, yes, this is defamation or not defamation? Now you are asking them to make that claim. You are now asking them to take it down irrespective of whether that evaluation is made. That is the framework in which why reduction of timelines becomes significant in conversations in terms of how it impacts regular speech. In terms of 3.4, certainty and certainty of law is great for everyone. It is great for a business that is doing, so when you talk about an SOP, you talk about these sort of things. They are great to know what the rules of the game are. They are fundamental to how you operate in a country, right? So for example, when you have this idea that Section 3.4 will now allow advisories, SOPs, etc. to be given, the understanding that has been now explained is that Section 79.2c has these words that say an intermediary must follow due diligence as duties under this act and other such guidelines as may be prescribed by the central government. That framing is now being used, which is essentially manifested in Section 87, which is rule-making power. So you can call it whatever you want. If it is to have the binding force of law, it must be issued under 87 in that framework. If it is not issued in that framework, it is advisory. And advisory also has a very important part to play. It indicates, because as we can sit in this room, all of us will have different interpretations of what IT rules might mean. An advisory is the government's interpretation of what it means. It allows a business to understand this is what the government is interpreting. I can now decide my compliance accordingly, not now, but also plan further ahead. If you take the problem of advisories further, this is not just a social media problem. An advisory, the ability for the executive to bypass the legislature to make law, binding law, impacts every digital business. Today, an intermediary is also a cloud service provider as stated in the Act, right? E-commerce platforms in the Act. I'm not even talking about new intermediary categories which will now start coming about. But what is effectively happening is that this one category will now be subject to any kind of issue that comes up. And we've seen kind of a trend around how rulemaking has been coming. It's been in response to things, which is also a valid point. I'm not at any point saying that technology is so static that we cannot, that we have to, yes, there is a problem. It evolves very fast. It goes beyond the space of regulation. But the core principles of what we are talking about, I think just framing that and understanding where that kind of comes is, that's the problem. Tomorrow, you're going to have an advisory saying, hypothetically, a cloud service provider must do XYZ thing. An e-commerce platform must do XYZ things. It is linked to the safe harbor. Now, the question of whether it is actually part of safe harbor under 17 is a separate question, but that is the framing in which you can imagine this to come about. And that is the real fear in 3.4.
So I'll give you an example here. Do you remember in 24, we had this brilliant advisory that came from MeitY about pre-registration of AI models, pre-vetting?
Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, it was withdrawn. If 3.4 comes into effect, as is given under the draft rules, it will affect every intermediary because it's under Rule 3, not Rule 4, which is only for significant social media intermediary. That's one. The question then arises, if something like that advisory, which was later withdrawn, is issued now, how will such an advisory work? Like, what happens?
That's actually a very interesting example. The fact that they came out with an advisory and could take it back is exactly the purpose of soft law. That is exactly the purpose of an advisory. You have put out an interpretation of what should happen. There is industry, the people who are involved, who are impacted, have responded saying this is not what is aligned with what the business, the technology, whatever XYZ reasons are. And hence the government has very well pulled that back. That is the problem. With 3-4, that becomes binding law. Now put yourself in the position of someone building technology. You don't build technology in a day. You build it over a period of time. It requires certainty. I need to know that if what I'm building today is going to be valid 6 months later.
Legal tomorrow.
I need to know what the legal rules of the game are. The ever-evolving legal rules are going to be problems for businesses. Similar problems exist for speech. Today, none of us know what is fair to say and not to say. That ambiguity of the ambiguity in what you can say and what kind of is protected or not protected is where that problem is kind of arising.
That's where the chilling effect.
Certainty of what is there is fair. As long as it is done through a process and procedure that is democratically established, we have to deal with the consequences, which is aside our political consequences at various different political, economic, geopolitical, social, all of those issues start coming in. But that's the function of rule making as well.
Got it. You brought up something very interesting about actual knowledge, and that's where I want to bring Torsha in. Torsha, I know you have things to say, so you can say that, but also address the question of actual knowledge as envisioned under Shreya Singhal. What happens to actual knowledge under 79(3)(b? And does this new 3-4, the binding advisory rule, have any impact on what actual knowledge means?
Hello. Oh,
You can use that mic.
Hello. Okay. I mean, I think it sort of ties to what both of you have already said. So actual knowledge under Shreya Singhal, and I think unless something else comes and overrides it, in many ways, Shreya Singhal is the binding law with reference to Section 79 and Section 69A. And what it really said, the Supreme Court, was that actual knowledge is understood when the intermediary has received a government notification or a court order. The term they used was government notification. So at the outset, it seems like that means something specific, right? So if you compare that to what Rule 3-4 says, clarifications, advisories, standard operating practices, that's a very different class of government intimations that have been floated that was not envisaged in Shreya Singhal. That's one thing. Second is that Rule 3-4 doesn't even talk about actual knowledge. What it says is that now like any of these things can be issued in pursuance of implementation or operationalization of Part 2 of the Act, right? That is also sort of incongruent to the vision of intermediary liability that Shreya Singhal had, because Shreya Singhal talked about content takedown. Part 2 of the IT rules now has a lot of other things that are not content takedown, right? There is the whole thing with significant social media intermediaries about best practices in automated content moderation. There is the synthetically generated information and the obligations of labeling, right? So how is the MeitY sort of being authorized to issue these new gamut of intimation to the intermediaries and asking them essentially to do this on the sort of prong of losing the prong of saying that, oh, you haven't observed your due diligence. So that also sort of doesn't really align with the vision of what Shreya Singhal said. And thirdly, and this might be a little radical because I am not I don't think this interpretation is quite backed by any of the court judgments. But when I say the government notification means something, if you look at the sort of placement of where in Supreme Court talks about government notification, Shreya Singhal, it comes right after its discussion with Section 69A, right? And Section 69A, as Sir has already mentioned, it has a procedure. The procedure is flawed. I think everybody here can talk to that, but it has a procedure, and the procedure was challenged in Shreya Singhal, and the government found enough merit to keep it and say, oh, this is constitutional. So when you say government notification, I think the understanding should be, and this is an ambiguous point, and I think the correct interpretation should be that 79 actually doesn't create a parallel procedure. I find myself in the unfortunate position of agreeing with X. Is that what it means? And that framing has some substantiation because the government, the court says that Section 79 is an exemption provision. Exemption to what? Exemption, and my understanding is it's an exemption to Section 69A because that's the criminal provision. It has.
So sure, not all of us are lawyers here. I certainly do not. Please dumb it down for me.
Sure. Okay. So an exemption. So if you look at the language of Section 79, it says the intermediary will not be held liable if it follows XYZ things, right? But the liability, what is the crux of the liability? That's not in Section 79. It's not a criminal provision. It doesn't list down punishment, for example. That you will find in Section 69, right? So because it has like a, I think 7-year imprisonment or something like that. So what I think is that when you think about government notification, the government should be actually routing their takedown intimations through section 69A. And if and only if that procedure is not followed, you have reached the intermediary, they have not responded, they have not taken it down, then the sort of criminal liability that is set in section 69A can apply to the intermediary and the process follows. So actual knowledge is there, and then this is the procedure. This is my understanding of
So
it.
I'll come to this concept of losing safe harbor and due diligence obligations in about 3 minutes. But what you mentioned is interesting in the sense you're saying that 79 has no takedown intimation power as well.
Is my interpretation of
Fair,
it.
fair. That's
Yeah.
actually X's argument as well.
Yeah, which is unfortunate.
From what I understand, practically everybody's assessment. Vasu, do you want to come in here and parse this further? That
So my understanding is actually that it's slightly contrary. I think that the way Shreya Singhal reads and the way 79.3 reads is basically that it constitutes, like we said earlier, it constitutes actual knowledge, right? So once the government notifies you under 79.3b, right, you're deemed to have got actual knowledge of the content. Now, if you don't take it down, right, if the content in the future is found to be liable, etc., and you could be secondarily liable for that content, right? That's my understanding of it. And if the content is not found to be illegal, there's no problem. You don't take it down. You don't, I mean, even if it doesn't matter whether you've lost your safe harbor or not, right? Now, the problem is that if you have the 3-hour requirement, I'm not going to make an informed decision. I'm not going to look at the content and say, what is my legal risk here? Right? I'm going to take everything down. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. If I get 5,000 orders or 3,000 orders, I'm not going to have a decision. But personally, yeah, I'm just not of the opinion that I would say that 79.3, the way the government understands it, the way the act reads, it basically constitutes actual knowledge under the Shreya Singhal rule.
actual knowledge, if sent from a police officer to say Meta.
In compliance with the IT rules.
Got it. Got it. Before we,
Can I just give you an example? I just like
you're censoring yourself.
That's a divine sign.
That's a divine sign.
Okay. Just say.
So I just had a conversation with someone who said that basically they've done a report, a journalist had done a report from a small village. And the head of the district got pulled up because, I mean, from the state government, someone pulled all them up that this happened in your district, right? And it did happen. This is the news report, valid, verified. The district collectors basically, I think the head of police head or whatever in that area, I don't know the designations, sent a letter using the server portal for censorship of that news report. And the platform had to take it down. So this is happening at a level where someone's basically sending a notice to protect their job and no one's able to discern or apply their mind, and news is getting censored across the board.
Nikhil, just on that, the Ministry
So is there no restriction in terms of at what level, who can send this? And do platforms even have that? Are platforms even conscious enough to check all of those things and just, we don't want to take a liability, so we'll censor? Is that what's happening right now?
So just on numbers, I completely agree with what Maheshwari sir said earlier, that make a list public of who can take down. The Ministry of
Why not just make every order?
I just come to that.
Make every order
I'll come to that. The Ministry of Home Affairs actually in a court or in a case happening in the Gujarat High Court, where the Gujarat High Court was basically in PIL for deep fakes. It went to the discussion of how do you look at blocking content. This is in light of what was coming out now. The MHA has gone on affidavit, and it is recorded in the order that 16,000 police stations have been enabled through the Sahयोग portal to send lawful takedown requests. That's the scale at which you're seeing from just the government. Now, the point that you're making essentially is that there is no space to do that.
No, so we are talking about a situation where a platform has to judge the legality of a notice that they've received. But if the notice itself is not legally valid, who's going to hold the person in one of those 16,000 police stations accountable for issuing those orders, which is an illegal order, which is coming from a person who's representing the government?
Court.
No, but so who's going to take them to court when you can't even see the order in the first place?
Not just that.
My whole point of this opacity just completely empowers people to censor speech without any restriction whatsoever, without any accountability whatsoever. And that is expanding at a scale and a pace. I mean, the point of what we're seeing here right now is one thing. What's next is the thing, like what layer is going to be put on top of this one? Because we've just seen one set of rules come out on Feb 20th or thereabouts. We've seen another set of rules now being discussed. Now, an amendment to that rule just come in. Who's to say 6 months from now, there won't be another one, another 6 months from then, another one. So you're just building these layers without any accountability in place.
And also just to add to Nikhil's point, which is what Rahul and Vasu talked about initially, not everybody can go to court.
Fair. I'm not absolutely cognizant of the fact that not everyone can go to court, but that is the legal remedy that the law provides right now. Yeah.
But I mean, so I think Rahul is right in that there isn't, like, legally, there isn't really anything that you can do if against an intermediary except go to court, right, against the government. But I would say that one interim solution that I potentially see is that, like Nikhil said, make the orders public. Right. So X went to court and the Karnataka High Court really doesn't deal with this in terms of why orders on the Sayog portal are not public.
Karnataka High Court completely misunderstood 79 and 69, and I can say that as a journalist. So you don't even need a legal mind.
So my point is actually, and I would say that the approach of the intermediaries, X, etc., the approach that I would have taken is just start uploading the orders. Right.
Like
and
to a database.
And if the government tells you that you can't upload the orders under 79(3)(b), right, then you go to court and say, hey, can we get a clarification that 69A has this confidentiality rule, but 79A doesn't, so 79(3)(b) doesn't. So can we just get a clarification from the court that we're not bound by Rule 16 of the blocking rules, we can upload these orders. Right, what is it in the 79(3)(b) order that is confidential? There's nothing that allows it to be confidential. So why not put it out there? And then potentially we'll see, one, the scale of the censorship, and two, what the censorship is targeting. Right?
That's a fair point.
Well, they used to put it up on chilling effects once upon a time.
Yeah.
So now the thing about intermediaries in particular is that the sword of safe harbor is always dangled over them. You do this, you bring us the sun, otherwise your safe harbor is gone. So I want to ask you, and a very short answer to that, what does the government mean when they keep threatening safe harbor? Like, what will they do? It's not a medal that's given to a company. It's determined by the function that they perform. So every time they invoke Rule 7, or they say, ooh, do this, do that, otherwise safe harbor gone. What will happen?
This is something which government also has never done it in the past. So they also do not know as to how exactly the aspect of safe harbor, if at all they decide to take it up, shall be taken up. Just wanted to also convey, it was not just about signature and the right person. I also mentioned about the right law for which you are authorized. And that actually limits, it keeps limiting as to who, when, in which condition, and with which evidence. So the fourth thing which I also wanted to convey is that they also need to attach an evidence as to why this is considered unlawful. Just simply sharing a URL saying that it is unlawful is not good enough. So what is really required is some sort of an SOP which really talks of the elements of what makes it a complete and a comprehensive notice to be acted upon. 3 hour, I once again believe, is a technological issue rather than for intermediary to look into the validity of the or maybe looking into the contents and the section. But prima facie, if they believe that it is definitely violated and the law which is being quoted versus the content which is being shown, if they do not match at all, the intermediary can at that time take the call, but that can be taken within 3 hours.
So 3 hours works when you get one order at a time. 3 hours doesn't work when you get hundreds of orders at a time.
So that's
Impossible.
I agree. I agree. I mean, I'm only trying to now justify what is there in the law. Maybe when it was in the consultative stage, I know, I mean, there are exam times. 3 hours is an important issue. There are elections time. That's when it was actually decided. I completely agree that if something is already lying for 5 years and all of a sudden government or somebody, I mean, finds it out and you ask it to be removed in 3 hours is quite illogical. So between what is considered as 3 hours to be good enough versus maybe some flexibility being there, yes, some sort of a discussion and maybe some recommendation should have been given. I
Got
believe
it.
it is
So,
possible.
questions from the room?
Nikhil, just
Yeah,
one.
Aditi, we have to move to, because we should start the next session. Rohit, right at the back. There's a mic there. Okay. Wait.
So just building on what was said, I agree with Rahil. For instance, certainty is important, but for certainty, even rules should not be amended on the fly, which I think that has become a random normal that we have all become accustomed to. So the question that I wanted to ask Rakesh ji is that we know that amending rules is not that difficult. We've seen that happening very often, and under the law, the rules are supposed to be laid in Parliament, but in our history, like in the past couple of years, when have we really seen rules being retracted? So my question is, what is the government's worry? Why can't it even publish rules? Why does it need legal authority for guidance and SOPs?
Because after we have these SOPs, there will be no need for rules.
No, but what I'm asking is that you can just as easily publish rules, because we've been amending the IT rules on the fly every 3 months. So why do you want to go a step further and include the rules and the SOPs and the guidance and give it legal authority when you can amend the rules? There is no obstacle to that. So I don't understand it.
Yeah. So, number one, because of the urgency of, maybe in a particular context, guidelines, directions, and there is a provision of directions in the IT rules. Those are definitely, I believe, possible. SOPs is also, in fact, SOP was requested by the court and hence SOP was issued, and therefore, as long as the conditions which have been stated that they have to be issued in writing, they must clearly provide the statutory provision in the rule. And so all those things, if they are correlatable, maybe they should be considered. I am not going into the law part of it, the validity under the law. Just 1 minute, sir. But in respect of advisory, I have a different opinion, because advisories per se are advisories in nature.
No,
that cannot be considered at par with the rules. Beyond that, I would also like to mention in the just concluded, PROGA rule, just published PROGA rules. In fact, I was looking for something similar in the PROGA Act. 383 does mention that the government or authority can issue the rules, directions, advisories, not advisories. This word advisory is missing. And in the rules also at many places, exactly same thing has been conveyed. There is nothing of such nature in the IT Act. To that an extent, maybe from a law perspective, it is an invalid proposition. But from a need perspective, guidance, directions, SOPs are all valid. Advisories continue to be advisories.
I'm just going to add one small sentence and hand it over. So the point, sir, I'm trying to sort of drive at is that consultation is not necessary. The government has published rules in the past without consulting. Before the Impact Summit, immediately rules were, published. What I'm saying is that even when speed is of the essence, the government has the capability to publish rules, as we've seen it again and again. So why, create this unnecessary thing of going a step further and sort of adding legal credibility to advisories? And I actually want to add to your point, I feel that we are spending a lot of time in talking about the nitty-gritties of the law. That is the wrong problem. It is a problem of politics. And you were right when you said that. We can debate about it, we can go into the words, what does the IT Act say, but the fact of the matter is the politics is the problem here. So, the law is not going to do much beyond a point.
So what do we do about the politics part is honestly my question. Like,
It's not politics. Everything is politics.
like, yeah, everything is, but do you act
in the politics?
like under the voluntary code of ethics, should intermediaries act on the prime minister's speech that was delivered to the nation using state apparatus? Like,
You
how
are
does-
doing politics. Let's focus on IT rules.
Hi, so this is either for kind of Vasudev or Torsha, I mean, or even Rahil, in the sense that there are essentially two responses to a 3-hour limit that we are saying now. One is that X either takes a call that, okay, we'll remove this or will not. And Meta largely just removes everything and it stays removed without an appeal. Is there any risk for platforms if they do interim removals, in the sense that until they've had time to make a determination internally, it stays down for that, from that 3-hour period onwards until they've had a time to review it? Or do you think that, okay, the fact that they've reviewed it and they've decided that it's not a speech threat and put it back up makes them publisher of that content? I mean, is there a case to be made here that interim removals are risky for platforms?
That's an interesting question. And I think in practice that rarely ever happens, mostly because the apparatus of the Information Technology Act is not sort of built to incentivize intermediaries to pause and sort of think. And in some ways, like in absence of a more deliberate way of saying, to be on the user side. I think the sort of, and we, like the question of what does it mean to lose safe harbor? I don't think anybody has a very clear answer, but the threat of criminal liability or the threat of, say, for example, the notice is that, oh, this is defaming XYZ person. The threat of then the intermediary being implicated in a defamation suit, I think is strong enough for the intermediary to not pause and think sort of the speech consideration. And that's one part of it. And the second is, and this is a little bit away from the legality of it, but I think platforms do their own content moderation a lot, right? Like that's a parallel system that exists voluntarily. And if you just look at those numbers, also the amount, like the numbers of restoration across Meta and X, it's extremely low. I don't think intermediaries are very interested in kind of like keeping speech up in the interest of free speech and stuff. And I apologize for the generalized statement.
Is there anything that prevents transparency from intermediaries under Section 79?
So just as a follow-up to that, if you look at the Rule 75 of the copyright rules, it actually has a fairly sane procedure for this, right? You send a notice, it gets taken down. If you can't get a court order within, I think it's 21 days or something like that, the intermediary is free to put it back up, right? So for content that's not, extremely volatile, that's actually a potentially quite a sensible approach to take, right? But you need some kind of legal clarity on that issue, and currently the IT rules doesn't.
So, Rasu, in the Shreyas case, I mean, I was there for about almost a month, and that's what, and I was talking to everyone, and that's what we were actually arguing for. We were arguing for a put down, we were arguing for a takedown and put back provisions similar to the DMCA for copyright, because I mean, there was one point of contention I remember someone raised that what if there is non-consensual sexual imagery that gets put up and that it gets taken down? What if someone pushes back and it gets put back up? And my argument was, who's going to claim liability for that in the first place? It'll stay down. So we argued for takedown and put back, but we got government orders and court orders instead. But you're right, that was our argument. Okay.
So Aditi, if I can quickly make a couple of clarifications. On 79.3b, just to go back to Shreyas, if you read para 170, where actually 79.3b was read down, it clearly says that the intermediary needs to assess whether the request is legitimate or not. Because at the end of the day, I don't think any American company needs to figure out whether this fits into 19.2 or not. So there is a clear understanding from the courts as well that they need to figure out whether this is legitimate or not. And that's what the judgment actually says. So you are going to say that the intermediaries are instead of courts, intermediaries are going to decide whether this is violating 1982 or not, then you are actually giving up a lot of rights in one way or the form, in one way or the other. So that's an interesting point. On 75, and since I had the opportunity to work on this, so on 75, on Rule 75 of the copyright rules, 2013, and then this is quite close to me because I did work on this. So on 75, the interesting part of it is that twofold, right? One, it differs from DMCA, and DMCA is done to the extent that the media says that I'll step back and I will pass on this notice the person you are alleging to violate the copyright. And then it needs to decide between the person who's saying that I own this piece of copyright and the person who's alleged to violate this or infringe on this copyright. So, and then the intermediary steps out of that equation, which is different from the Indian law. So is that it will come up if you don't produce an injunction order in 21 days. And for those 21 days, the intermediary or the telecom operator has to put up a notice that this particular piece of content has been taken down for under this particular provision. So if, let's say, I put out a false copyright claim, then I, as the owner of the copyright claim, will go to that website and see that someone has put out a false copyright claim. And that's the importance of the transparency there. But just going back to the 79(3)(b) point, I don't think we should we shouldn't harp on the fact that the intermediaries should be the defenders of free speech in this country.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question on the sort of discussion around safe harbor itself. I think we can all fairly agree that the dagger of sort of safe harbor as a punitive measure doesn't really work because one, we're not talking about it as a switch. It works for specific pieces of content. But I was generally curious what the panel thinks as alternatives for a checks and balance. What would be a right approach in terms of ensuring platforms are more accountable? One is obviously transparency reports, but something which is more sort of dialogic in nature. So what does the panel have to say on that?
So the notice problem is quite interesting, right? If you look at other censorship apparatus in other countries, there is no notice mechanism. It is just an order which is, there is no notice to the user or the intermediary. So 69 is quite unique in that way. I don't think anywhere in the world, any censorship apparatus, internet censorship apparatus has the checks and balances like the 69 it does. The implementation, yes, there are questions, but 69 is perhaps one of the most robust processes out there. Now coming to 79 and the problem of notices, right? So basically, in 69A, the problem of notice is that whether the intermediary should provide personal identifiable information to the government so that the user is notified. The intermediary notifies the user whose content is in question. Now, this particular user who has posted this content believes that this particular piece of content is illegal. And if anonymous handle or any of those cases, then the notice process pretty much becomes tortuous because is defunct, because there is no way a person who believes that they have put out illegal speech would appear before a government authority and have the risk of getting arrested for that matter, right? Or be prosecuted. So notice may not necessarily work, and giving the notice to the user may not necessarily work all the time. What will work and what should work is that transparency, so that any concerned citizen or anyone can sort of pick up those cases and say that this violates my fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression. Essentially, to say that right to freedom of speech and expression includes your right to receive information as well. So I think that's when the conversation needs to go, where we are talking more of transparency. And I'll again, just to the point that 79(3)(b) notices, please put it on a website.
So who has to put it on which website?
Sorry?
Yeah, who has to put it on which website? Platforms should put it on their websites, or the government needs to put it on their websites, or should there be both weeks? But the transparency reports don't really, I haven't seen a transparency report for a while now from platforms either. So we're seeing lack of transparency from both government and platforms right now.
So
wrong.
platforms do actually put out transparency reports, and the content of those notices are not there. Lumen database has become very restricted to definition notices and most of the copyright notices. What we did see there is 79.3b. Yes, I think that there should be more efforts from the intermediaries to do so, but at the same time, we should expect the government to do so as well.
Is this a portal under RTI? Does anyone have any thoughts on this? Should it be under RTI? Should it not be?
It is under RTI.
Sorry.
It is under RTI.
Respond, right?
They give some information.
I wanted to just respond a little bit on this concept of what does it mean to lose safe harbor? What should we do? Why are we looking at rules?
Right, closer to the mic.
Sorry. Okay, on safe harbor, agreed, piece of content over there, but for a business, for an intermediary, it's their license to operate. Without this underlying protection, it is not a certificate given, it is an underlying kind of safety that you have to operate in a country, to operate over here, primarily because 79.3 actually is restricted to liability for third-party content. So when we talk about how should we make our platforms accountable, first let's answer what are we making them accountable for, what is the harm that we are identifying, where are we going down that road. I think currently you have an apparatus, and this kind of responds a little bit also to what users do and why do you not see it. It's actually that the tools that are created to counter these, whether they are through platforms on their entire chain, whether it is through accessing the GAC, accessing it, critiquing it, and I understand there are problems with GAC, there are various things to look at, but there is a mechanism built in over there. First is the utilization of an existing mechanism before we start reinventing the wheel on kind of this entire piece. In terms of the why advisories, why not rules, all of that, I think two things very particularly, I think, Rohit, just in response to your question is that one, the rulemaking still has an idea of there are functionally two different tools that are being used. The fact is that now you are saying that an advisory has legal kind of validity. In all kind of ways, an advisory, all of the advisory SOP guideline, whatever you want to call it, a direction, must draw its power from the primary legislation that we are talking about. We have moved a long way in the IT rules to now what it covers. What it now covers is an amorphous idea of various different harms that are now being pushed into one. So now you want to come up with the idea of giving an advisory. Actually, the Committee on Subordinate Delegation, rules that are placed before Parliament, that is the way to access it. It is to put pressure on legislators, to put MPs under pressure to say, please, there are rules coming in, challenge them. You need to file a motion, and I've filed while I was working with a parliamentarian, you can file a motion to actually have rules discussed on the floor of the House. The last time this happened, interestingly, was also in 2011 when the IT rules were first looked at. That was the first instance. And then after that, it hasn't been. But then you can actually have debate on rules in the House. So there are various mechanisms that exist, both from a legal perspective, from a sort of informal perspective, from a parliamentary perspective, that are not being utilized because there is almost a acceptance, a fait accompli of what is going to happen. And hence, you're absolutely right. Just put it into rules. It doesn't make a difference. But an advisory is not fundamentally meant to make law like a rule is meant to make. An advisory is meant to tell you this is what we think about it. An SOP is meant to tell you this is the standard operating procedure that finds validity in law. So when the NCII became an SOP, it came from the Madras High Court, which has the power to make kind of judge-made law is also valid law. We can have a separate conversation on judicial activism. But that is valid law. That came as an SOP. It got translated in the IT rules. Now you find the manifestation in the NCII. That's a great process to follow.
Well, courts themselves are problematic right now. We got so there was a data breach a few weeks ago. We got threatened with a contempt of court notice if we report about it when we contacted the company about the data breach, and that notice came from a law firm who I know very, very well. So the courts are also issuing John Doe orders for censorship of reporting that needs to be done.
The Delhi High Court also recently restored accounts. That the judiciary has problems, sure. That's a separate question again.
No, but the John Doe orders that are coming up from the judiciary right now for censorship that can, and they're so vaguely worded that is being used to censor reporting on data breach that, by the way, which impacts data of listed companies. Confidential data of listed companies.
Single pieces of censorship must be addressed as single pieces of censorship within the framework that is coming in, right?
I think if you can count how many instances John Doe orders have been issued in the last month alone, by the way, preventing reporting, because I talk to journalists, right? So it's not one instance. I'm saying courts themselves have now started issuing these John Doe orders for prevention of reporting on this, or there are law firms that are interpreting those orders in a manner that reporting can't be done, because the text of the order is that that no part of this suit may be publicized, which means reporting becomes publicizing it. It's bizarre what's going on. Right?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there are two responses, right? One is you go down the legal route, and it's a bit of a lottery, like we're discussing, right? Even if you look at the challenges, you have the FCU fact check unit gets struck down in the Bombay High Court. You have in Karnataka, you have the Twitter judgment, right? It's a bit of a lottery, and you take your chances. And I think the strategy there should be to sort of decentralize risk, decentralize reward, right? But I think you take your chances with the courts. The separate thing is, I think if platforms are facing the brunt of this government pressure to take down vast amounts of content in a short amount of time, I think going back to the transparency, that's something that's completely untied from courts, right? There's nothing stopping, in my opinion, platforms from sharing all the 79(3)(b) orders. A next step would be, when I try to access the content, show me the order, so I can challenge the order. Anybody whose content is blocked can see the order, right? Ideally, what we would like is for the government to disclose these orders, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen, right? But that's a situation where then you allow journalists, you allow ordinary citizens to then put pressure on the government for its censorship apparatus, untied from the courts, right? Because now we can see the scale of the censorship, we can see what the government is going after, and we as citizens can judge whether we like that or not. Right. So I think that is the way, that's in my opinion, the two different approaches, and they both need to be pursued simultaneously.
Fair enough. You've been waiting for a while.
Just like continuing, I mean, just short comment and then the question, the comment being a lot of the ecosystem was also celebrating not having a comprehensive AI governance law, even though, you know, with IT rules, we've seen that the delegated legislation has gone so far away from the, you know, Parent Act. But yeah, like just food for thought that I think, yeah, we're also afraid of like new legislation because it's still coming from the same source. And to the question is from the previous panel, we heard journalists, like I felt that there was a thread, which was, there was a distinction between takedown of pointed takedowns for specific posts, content, those content takedowns versus deplatforming. So especially in the case of 4 p.m. So to the legal experts here, what are the, I mean, is the recent jurisprudence with like the Delhi High Court, restoration of X accounts, are there any specific clauses and rules being mentioned in the case, in the orders, which will create that distinction and finally allow us to have some comprehensive jurisprudence on deplatforming? Considering we don't, and I may be mistaken, considering what I believe, we don't have anything specific for protections on that end. And to people who've been in companies which received these takedown orders, is there a different pattern that you see with respect to deplatforming requests versus specific content takedowns, pointed content takedowns?
See, in 69A, we had very clear guidelines as to when to take down a particular post or when to deplatform. And something similar has to be here, and because they are not there in the rules, maybe through SOP or otherwise within the rules. Because why SOP is, because SOP will remain much more flexible, but it has to be transparently known to the users as to what is the basis. I did mention, for example, there are scenarios where by looking at the profile picture and profile message itself, you can conclude that it is anti-India. So we don't have to go into the contents itself, anti-India. Why? Because maybe they are coming from outside India. But in otherwise, in all other cases, a well laid down criteria of why to deplatform. Otherwise, there is no reason. But why deplatforming is done? Because the impact it creates is much, much higher. Removing a video, removing one post actually creates more problem than it solves. So, but transparency is, I do agree. I mean, it's important. Criteria is important.
I think we're bang out of time now.
Can I just give a couple of examples here about how the process works? Because I've done some reporting on here. I'll cite 3 instances, 2 that I've reported on specifically. One was Congress Jharkhand's Twitter account was blocked in the middle of general elections under an emergency Section 69A order. So the committee met after the emergency order was passed. And in that committee, what was discussed was that some committee members said that, hey, these are general elections going on. You are trying to take down an entire grey tick account. This is disproportionate. The other said, oh, no, we must. And this was, if I remember correctly, about the edited speech of the Home Minister, senior BJP leader, related to reservations, right? Eventually, the entire Twitter account was blocked. Now, my problem there is with the government and Twitter, sure, but my problem is also with Congress. I mean, it's sheer idiocy. They never challenged it. They just created a brand new account and are going their merry way. So we talk about journalists in villages not being able to go to courts. This is the biggest opposition party. And the great Twitter account got taken down. Got blocked, sorry, not taken down, got blocked, and they're chill about it. So that's one case. The second case is the case of Hindutva Watch, which is when Twitter, Hindutva Watch actually filed a petition in Delhi High Court challenging the 69A order, where then Twitter was also made a party and Twitter made its submissions. In that particular case, the actual 69A order was not made public. It was submitted under sealed cover. MeitY insisted on it as well. But Twitter's objections to the process were documented, and I'd reported on them then. And Twitter was like, hey, if you have problem with specific tweets, block specific tweets. Why are you blocking the entire account? Now, I think Bar and Bench or Live Law reported on the Nimo Yadav case, Pratik Sharma case, where the order actually went public. Twitter submitted it. The government lawyer was like, cool, submit the order. It became public. And that is where we saw that process happen, where Twitter again challenged it, that, hey, disproportionate action. But what happens as a result of it is the question. So it's not just the orders themselves, but also the entire discussion that happens or how intermediaries respond, which is also crucial to understand what's happening. And honestly, political parties need to be a bit more courageous. Like, go to court and get proper lawyers, know your own law. And if you're starting a thing like the Digital Azadi campaign, know whether it's an actual act or a proposed draft. Get your basics right, which is what Rahul also spoke about.
Okay, I'm going to take very 2 quick comments here.
Thank you. It's a little adjacent to the conversation with Mr. Maheshwari, what you were talking about, whether a particular handle, and you can tell from its profile picture and its bio that it's anti-India. That's a very broad categorization. I mean, it's a matter of opinion, right? What anti-India is. One could just be critique, which is constructive, and the other could be legitimate recruitment for terrorist cells. Now, I mean, I'm just saying that even this is a bit of a very dangerous catch-all, right?
Does not therefore happen in a normal scenario, but somebody who is putting, let's say, Indian tricolor burning, and that's your profile picture, or I hate India. Not hate India is still okay, but something, I mean, beyond this, which you can make out that maybe. So in those scenarios, we were able to make out as to whether either it is not from India, and maybe based on profile itself, you can make out, of course, within the contents also, you can easily make out that it is is definitely, I mean,
See, unless there's transparency, there's no accountability. How can we leave it to the determination of someone in the government to decide whether something is violating 92 or not?
yeah, so it is not in respect of 19.2, so it's not a 3.1D kind of a notice. It is with respect to 69A, where along with the platform, the committee takes the call. So it's not that it was, and then the requesting person. So there are at least three sets of stakeholders.
So who holds the committee to account?
There is a review further.
By the committee, the committee reviews itself, the government reviews itself, or is there if the entire review process is going to remain within government, then nobody is held to account.
So if the court clearly has conveyed that this review by the government, action initiated by the government is valid, who are we to now challenge this unless we once again challenge it in the court?
We can't challenge it in the court because there's no transparency to be able to prove that they're not following the process or what is illegal.
Because I was an aggrieved party. If the aggrieved party has some problem that they believe it has gone wrong, there can always be cases. I mean, I don't say an individual case, but then if there can always be good number of cases where people can approach the court if the government is doing wrong.
But isn't it more constructive to have thresholds of what codifying it?
Exactly. So this is what we attempted to codify in 69A, I believe, because 69A is still a very, very central function, and hence there can be lots of logic built into it. When 79 is or 3.1D is a decentralized function, there is still more need to have as much as codification as possible. In fact, what we miss in 79 3.1D is the law enforcement agencies also take the route to block the websites. I believe 79 3B blocking is not taking down. It doesn't fall under 3.1D.
Hi, so just the last question, and perhaps this will round it out as well. I'm not a lawyer and I didn't understand a lot of what you guys were talking about, but what my quick question is Shreya Singhal still relevant, and are we still working within the framework of what it has laid out in a line, if possible?
I'm not a lawyer. The answer to both the questions is no. In fact, in the Twitter case in Karnataka High Court, the Solicitor General on behalf of the Government of India actually said that there are problems with Shreya Singhal, but I will not get into them right now. That he essentially, I'm not quoting him verbatim, but he actually said something to the effect of that it is out of date. It is not dealing with what's happening right now, but I'm not going to get into that entire thing right now. He actually said that.
The judgment also refers to the fact that you need to revisit Shreya Singhal on that, but it is still good law.
Yeah, I mean,
Last word.
I'm agreeing with Rahul, it's good law, but I think also maybe our problem is that we are clinging to Shreya Singhal, right? Shreya Singhal, the crux of Shreya Singhal is addressing a very unique problem, which is how do you stop horizontal censorship by private parties? Right? That was the crux of what the reading out down of 79 3B. Today, the crisis we're facing is government censorship, right? It's government notices. Your Part 3 rights are fully in effect, right? You don't need to worry about a private party sending a notice to a platform. It is the government sending you the notice for removal of content. Your right to free speech is directly engaged. We actually just need new case law to deal with this new problem, right? And I think that is maybe where we need to update our thinking a little bit.
It's a fair point. Thank you all. Great discussion. We're going to move straight to the next session, which is specifically on the IDC. Thank you, sir. I think you got most of the questions. But I'm going to invite Atar, invite Jatin. I think everyone's outside right now. Sneha. And Alexander's here. Hi.
You'll be in the line to find the most.
So very quickly, I think what we need to, what we're looking to focus on in this discussion is about MIB's expanded reach, about the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, about the fact that there's an interdepartmental committee whose scope has been expanded for censorship of speech. In my thinking is that there are now the social media censor board rather than something like an IDC. The platforms are being used to censor speech that we saw in the first session. But government also faces challenges because the expansion of the number of publishers on the internet makes it impossible for the government to regulate speech directly. And the internet confuses things a little for people because people are communicating, but they're also publishing at the same time. So that entire space has changed because publishers have moved online. And so there are no easy answers over here. So I'm going to start first with Jatin. Jatin, I wanted to understand, what's the there is, when I look at it from the government's perspective, right, why shouldn't the regulations that apply to media apply to online content creators, people who are publishing news online, people who are posting about news? Because historically, everything was centered around a few publishers, a few channels, a few entities. And now that now all of that activity is moved online, right? So the same yardstick of accountability that they had, shouldn't the same yardstick exist online? And if something needs to be addressed or censored because it may be violative of a law, shouldn't that apply to users because everyone's a publisher now? So you can't have a situation where everyone's a publisher, but accountability is only mainstream media.
Yeah, so conceptually, there's no problem with that. The problem here is that, see, the media space is already over-regulated. The news space is already over-regulated, right? But it is done through an umbrella of multiple laws. Even the penal laws, BNS, etc., apply to news and information space. The problem really is the manner in which it is being done. The over assumption of powers, or the executive just usurping everyone else's powers, whether it's parliament or whether it's the judiciary. That's where the problem is. It's not about regulating news. News has already been regulated.
But do you see a distinction between, let's say, just a regular person tweeting about news and a journalist running a channel on YouTube talking about news? I mean, reporting the news. Do you see a distinction anymore?
But there is a distinction. An ordinary person commenting on something is covered under free speech. But a person giving you news, or an entity giving you news, is regulated. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Why does that distinction exist anymore?
That distinction should exist. That's not a problem. The problem is who is going to decide what should be the distinction. It's the domain of the parliament, not of the executive. The executive in this is basically police. I mean, in the first session in the morning, what we heard was this selective application of what they think should be regulated. That's the problem. We had multiple examples in which people who said anything inconvenient for the government or powers that be, they were being clamped down upon. And there is opacity in the process. There is no way to find out why you are being clamped. We heard them saying that, this is why I think I was being clamped down upon. So this can only go away when there is complete transparency in the process.
And there are people who talked about the interdepartmental committee and the meetings that they were in, where they were warned that they would be taken down.
So the IDC itself is a problem because it is the executive acting as the jury, the judge, and the accused. And then on top of it, they have the power to suo motu, without a complaint, take up matters. So everything is so jumbled now. It's classic executive overreach, to the power of impunity.
So is the press club's position that there should be no regulation of someone perhaps sharing misinformation on the internet or not entirely correct information on the internet? Shouldn't they be treated as news entities and required to abide by a code of conduct?
When the Press Club of India gives memberships to people, we look at their professional record. You have to have been a journalist for 5 years before you can apply to be a member. And then there is a committee that decides, that screens. So we are not against screening. The problem here is the manner in which it is being done, the arbitrariness, the opacity, and the selective applicability of, and with every knee jerk, you come up with a new set of iterations or amendments, and this is going to go on. This has to shift back to Parliament. There is a problem. Disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, these are real world problems with real world harms. These need to be taken care of, but not by the executive in this fashion. Then who should? The Parliament should come up with a law. The government should approach Parliament. They should have a discussion. If we can have 16,000 police stations being empowered to issue takedown notices, we should be having these 16,000 of these discussions first in open society and a build up to a law. I gave you the example yesterday of the December 16, 2012 gang rape, which led to changes in criminal law. There's a process. This process has been completely thrown to the winds. That's the problem here.
Sneha, what counts as news and current affairs today? How do you define it? The regulation seems to mix the two. Is opinion a part of it? Is it just about newsworthy content? There's an excessive amount of subjectivity in the regulation right now. What should be the right approach? How do you define what is news today in law?
I think in law, you have to keep in mind that nothing is interpreted in the abstract. You always have certain facts based on which an interpretation will happen. Unfortunately, yes, you're absolutely right. What was considered news earlier was in the form of what is the medium through which you would receive it. That has completely changed today. And that is the reason why today we are struggling at some level to understand how to interpret what news and current affairs is, because they are being clubbed together. Honestly, I personally don't believe that there is a straitjacket formula in which you can put it. But to what you said a few moments ago, somebody sharing their views at a personal level, not being accountable, versus somebody whose profession it is or whose livelihood it is to come up with stories that are fact-checked, I think ultimately makes the difference. There is no straitjacket formula that you can have. I can open the IT rules and read the definition for you, but that's not going to help any of us here because it is that subjective. I mean, I can go back to...
in regulations, you need...
Give you an example. I can go back to the copyright case that I was doing on SMS rights, where the cricket score was considered news of the day.
Yeah.
Now, somebody can argue that, listen, it is news because we are a cricket crazy nation. We are. It is news to a person who is willing to pay that money to know if Sachin hit a 6 or he got out just before he was supposed to make his 100. But it is not news to 100 other people who don't care about cricket at all. So it is very subjective. I think what is important is for us to understand that it's not about news, it is about speech. The extent to which speech can be regulated is 19.2. That is where the scope creep is happening. That is where new limitations which are not a part of 19.2 are being included. For example, slowly we are seeing judgments coming up where public interest, which is not a part of 19.2, is being brought in because broadcasting is happening on airwaves. Because airwaves were regulated at one point of time, you are bringing in public interest as a part of 19.2.
So very interesting you should mention this, because the IT secretary in a meeting related to age restrictions, I remember the press release from the National Human Rights Commission. He specifically said that access to the internet is public infrastructure. I have never heard that construct related to speech before, because access for children to the internet is also speech, right?
And in fact,
So that expansion of this seems looks like the expansion of public interest is now moving to internet access as well.
Absolutely. In fact, the Supreme Court, when it held access to internet as a right under the fundamental rights, and it protected the medium itself, to my mind, by protecting the medium, you have elevated the medium itself to, like it was done in the news cases, I keep forgetting.
The Tata Press?
Before Tata Press, the one which literally set up the, sorry?
Sakal.
So, yes, Sakal papers.
Sakal papers,
So
yeah.
at that time, newsprint was protected. Similarly, internet has been protected, broadcasting has been protected, but that talking about airwaves in the context of limited airwaves, which is what Secretary MIB versus Union of India had done at that point of time, expanding it to privately controlled unlimited resources is where the problem is arising. And you're making it as a part of public infrastructure and then calling it control. Now, to give you the understanding of what public infrastructure is and how it arose in Secretary MIB, the whole case on airwaves was cricket matches to be, the signals of cricket matches to be mandatorily shared with Prasar Bharati. Otherwise, we will not allow you to use the government satellite. So the broadcaster said, I don't need to use the government satellite. I will use a private satellite. And therefore, I don't need government control. And ultimately, the majority judgment had actually held that if you're not using government limited resources, then there is no limitation. You actually have to look at free speech, because the money that the BCCI earns out of this event is being plowed back in the game. And that is what was protected. So that was elevated to the right to free speech. But today, all that is being diluted in the name of public interest, because there was a dissenting opinion which said, no, there should be public interest limitations that should apply, even when there is private resources that we're talking about, which may be unlimited. So that is the public infrastructure argument, which is being said that no, internet is public infrastructure, and therefore we will bring it within the same ambit of government-controlled airwaves, which was in dispute in the Secretary MIB case.
Apart, some may argue that the news-related content has an obligatory responsibility to truth and accuracy. Where does opinion stand in this case? Especially when MeitY frames it as news and current affairs related. Isn't there like a direct conflict with freedom of expression?
None of this matters. MeitY will take down whatever is critical of the Prime Minister. Its process and enforcement is not tied to one single sentence in the IT rules. It doesn't matter. I have seen it. It's not obeying court orders. It's not.
Can you tell us where it's not obeying court orders?
Some of them are in litigation. Monday, people can come to Sachin Datta's court and argue.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, these are all pending matters. There were two people here. You can check out their orders. There are Sahyog orders we've gotten today at the High Court. You can see those orders. The Sahyog amendment which has been made obligates a review by the secretary of the authority which is sending the Sahyog order. Where are those review committees at the state level? You'll file a RTI, the RTI won't be responded. You'll ask the secretary, MeitY, he'll say it's not our duty. We've just made the portal, we've just made the rules. And they're not going by anything in this. So it doesn't matter what's the constitutional language. If your entire enforcement process which is there is not being complied with. There are specific court orders they're not complying with. And I'm making those arguments in court. Some of them are being reported. I can't get into the specifics because it will impact the client's interests. The second thing I'll just mention is that the basic framework which is here and the IT rules which is there, which is already under stay, some parts of it will be circumvented through administrative practices. They are being done again and again. And it doesn't matter even if there is a review committee hearing or an examination committee, etc., or an IMC committee which is there, which says that we will give a notice to an impacted person, because that person, firstly, the entire account will be blocked. It will not be unblocked till you appear before the committee. When you appear before the committee, you have to give your Aadhaar card. Your Aadhaar card has been linked to your social media account. The committee will make you sign an undertaking. So you're almost in a position of a ransom that I just want my account back. So none of this is being followed. I can show it again and again. In fact, I was arguing the IT rules constitutionality, which is pending in the Delhi High Court. The MeitY's counsel, and you can check the court reporting, they came and they said that the IT rules 2021, in which there are 2 stay orders, the entire batch was referred to the Delhi High Court by the Supreme Court, and then the Chief Justice transferred it to a division bench, which is headed by Justice Chawla. The government council said that we are in the process of amendment of the IT rules and they have already changed. So please give us an adjournment. And what were the changes they showed? This happened, I think so 3 weeks ago. They showed the changes which had already been notified on February 10th and were enforced on February 20th. This happened 3 weeks ago. So there is both a lack of capacity, gross incompetence and malice. There is no observance of law any longer. There is no civil society which is effective to push back. We've gotten our first secretary after 2 years. They notified the Sahyog amendments without a public consultation. They notified the SGI amendments which were beyond the scope of the initial consultation, materially varying. For instance, now the information of a person who operates a social media account will be given to the complainant in the absence of FIR, not only to the ministry. This is there. And they only did this consultation because there was some pushback finally, right? And even what's happened in this consultation, you release the consultation on 8th of April, you keep it for 15 days, we send letters, we ask for 15 more days, you extend it. And this department, in the middle of that consultation, after 5,000 people have been facilitated through my organization to send responses, 2 days ago, on 21st of April, suggests one more change. This is a government department which put out an open data policy which it changed thrice after it had uploaded it and said it will sell our personal data because I kept pointing it out. And I have Wayback Machine screenshots to show it. This is a finalized document. So there is gross incompetence and at the same point of time, there's a complete lack of adherence to the law. And this is for a far cry from the AI Summit, which had its own brand of incompetence. This is because the private sector does not speak up. It wants the government officials to be on its panels, shake hands, give a bouquet, and they think that is policy advocacy. Are you getting what you want? Are you getting what you want? You will get it. You're from the private sector, no?
So I don't know how to respond to that, but we'll write him up at far. I have more to write about. But Alexander, just to turn to you, and what when you look at the broadcast bill and you look at these set of rules, do you see any difference? The broadcast bill was largely pulled back because of the pushback that came in at this time. We also have a situation where there are matters in court that are challenging Part 3 of the IT rules, which regulates the media in particular, and these rules essentially just bypass everything, right? So, what is it that can be done about these rules in that shape or form? Is it the same thing? First up.
So this is essentially a backdoor mechanism to bring in what the broadcast bill tried to introduce. We did make submissions, right? Because no copy was made publicly available. Surprisingly, in the 2007 iteration, there was still a provision which mandated that there would be a judicial review. In the 2024 or the 2022 iteration, that wasn't the case, right? So it does materially introduce what the broadcast bill tried to introduce at the time, and it was rightfully shelved. Another thing that I want to call out is the delegated legislation, and the room has deliberated about it enough, but it has to be within the four corners of the parent legislation, right?
Even the 2021 rules weren't.
Correct.
So why should we expect any different now?
I don't expect it to be any different. I mean, APAR has already given a excellent review of what it is. And, in my experience, stakeholder submissions lead to very little material change into what has been introduced, right? So we may make submissions. The rules, if and when they're notified, are going to look very similar. So that's largely it.
Okay.
Did I miss out on anything?
No, I'm just so let's look at the IDC, right? So the Rule 14.2 expands the jurisdiction of the IDC to matters referred by the MIB, but the phrase matters remains undefined. Is it a legal phrase?
It's not. It's not defined. User is not defined. The distinction between a publisher and a user is not defined. In fact, the language as it stood earlier referred to complaints, right? So what you've essentially done is you've removed tier 1, the tier 2 with the SROs, and it straight up goes to the IDC. The IDC has the liberty to make arbitrary decisions, right? So in essence, what they're trying to do is introduce a sweeping provision to review whatever they deem fit, whether it's by a publisher or by an intermediary or even by a user. I want to, move beyond the issue with the introduction of user and talk about the intermediary as well. Everyone knows what an intermediary is, but somebody used an excellent analogy that an intermediary is essentially like a postman carrying the parcel from place A to place B without knowing what's in the parcel. What do you do now? Do you review everything? Do you introduce
One can argue that intermediaries are already reviewing things on their own platform. So I know that wasn't upheld by the division bench, but Justice Pratibha Singh's judgment in the Darvi's e-commerce case looked at passive and active intermediaries. So then, in that sense, is the definition of intermediary as a non-partisan, non-participative entity already? Has it been dismantled? Are they not involved anymore? And shouldn't regulation take into account the fact that they do censor content on their own because it violates the community guidelines, which are of their own making, but they also are involved in actively promoting certain kinds of content based on however the algorithm is structured, which wasn't a situation that was taken into consideration in 2015 during Shreya Singhal. So shouldn't the regulations also change to take these things into account?
They should, and the intermediaries, it's a blend of guardrails that they have, right? You have customer facing documentation, you mentioned community guidelines. There are, of course, modalities to monitor what kind of content you have, but that defeats the entire purpose of an intermediary. If you go back to the definition, it includes everybody from an internet service provider to a cyber cafe.
Correct. It's broad enough because in the internet, companies shapeshift, right? AOL was both a website as well as an ISP.
Yeah.
So the word intermediary is a function, not a company. Effectively in the law.
Yeah.
So the function can still be regulated, but then the question is, are these functions now intermediary functions anymore? Because they're controlling like an editor. And this is an argument that the government makes, that like an editor. And even Manish Tiwari in his data protection bill submission said that they should be treated like publishers because they perform an editorial function.
Again, we go back to the argument about safe harbor, right? If they have to do this, they are essentially assuming secondary liability for the users. Why would they want to do that, right?
But today, the promotion or the algorithm itself can elevate misinformation to a substantial level. So I'm just saying, and I'll probably ask Jatin about this because he's worked in that domain. There is a problem, right? Because the platforms are no longer they do amplify misinformation because of engagement metrics and how algos function. So are they neutral parties anymore?
No, certainly not. In fact, even before they under the law, even before they try to align their community guidelines with the prevailing local laws, they were always not only just platforms, they were much more. And the fact is that if you can reward anonymity, malice and virality and place it much higher than news, then definitely you are not just playing an editorial function. I mean, editorial function comes with a set of values and ethics. You're actually only promoting what gives you more profit, and irrespective of what real world harms it causes. So clearly intermediaries have gotten away with a lot under safe harbor.
The government now has seen this problem, and because it's a whole of society problem, and it needs a whole of society approach. But again, I keep going back to the same thing, that it's for the government to bring a legislation and for the parliament to legislate, not for the executive to assume the powers of what parliament should do. Or and these repeated iterations of the IT rules, I'm going to make a mockery of legislation per se. Delegated legislation is a thing, but the sheer expanse of these repeated proposed amendments and amendments and amendments, and within a set of under consideration amendments, another set of amendments, this is a problem.
Come in, Nikhil, and add a couple of things here. The e-commerce case you mentioned is something that I was integrally involved in. I've been representing intermediaries since literally when the intermediary law came in India. We were counsels for IMAI in the Shreya Singhal matter. So very closely have been fighting to protect the safe harbor. But at the same time, what must be kept in mind are two things. Absolutely agreed that on ground, the role that intermediaries are playing today is not just of a pipeline through which a water is going. They are involved in using materials in the pipeline, which is purifying the water to some extent, changing its taste, changing its color, shape, etc. So that role has changed. Yes, the legislation is taking some time to catch up, but there are two things that I must point out, which I think are very important tools that can be used and is being used slowly in courts. So the first was the amendments that happened in 2021, and subsequently the obligation of the Rule 3 now is on an intermediary to make reasonable efforts by itself. Now, that reasonable efforts by itself to not allow its system to be used for all those things is a very, very important tool, which I think can be deployed when an intermediary tries to take a hands-off approach completely. Intermediaries cannot argue anymore that we are passive intermediaries. They have to establish that they are responsible intermediaries. That's what the expectation, I think, of not just the civil society, but the government also is. Obviously, the government wants many more things, but coming to courts have started hauling intermediaries not only in an e-commerce marketplace context, but also in other contexts where they're trying to take a hands-off approach despite it being shown that they can't take a hands-off approach. And while this example is in an IP context, I think the best example is the Google keywords litigation, where Google tried to argue a lot about how we are not involved in sponsored ads, etc., etc. But the fact that Google's algorithms were structured in a particular way, while the court said, okay, your policy per se is not bad in terms of how you are allowing keyword bidding to happen. To be conscious of the fact that you are allowing certain ads and you are not allowing certain ads. And therefore, if your algorithms are taking certain decisions, then to that extent, you have to be accountable. So therefore, I think that this is already there, springing from the fact that intermediaries cannot take a hands-off approach anymore. Their role in how their platforms are being used and how much involvement they have in the platform's content, which is going up, is being scrutinized. There are blanket genre orders which are coming, and I absolutely agree there are some orders which are leading to pre-censorship. I don't know if anybody's picked up on this or not, but there are orders which are coming from district courts in some states where even before a movie has been, no, this is not Delhi, this is Bangalore, even before a movie has been released.
Correct. The reviews are censored. Correct.
Now, that is overbroad. And unfortunate reality is that I know for a fact those judges are not made aware of all the implications of their decision. They are not implemented properly. So that is at least a saving grace, I would say. But the fact of the matter is that there are hooks that are available if you want to catch an intermediary who's trying to hide behind a safe harbor and argue that I am not responsible, I am not accountable. Then there are ways to approach them and ways to understand that, listen, you can't take a hands-off.
So how do you draw the line? Because the way I'm seeing this is we're in a situation where we need the intermediary, we need to protect the newsprint, right? We need to protect the carriers of our speech. At the same time, the carriers of our speech are not accountable to anyone, and they are amplifying and censoring, and they seem to be accountable only to the whims of the government right now, or the orders of the government. So where does this rest right now? And just going back, because they are also being used as mechanisms for censorship, and that's the main concern, right? Our speech is being censored through us because the government is unable to manage the speech of 1 billion people online, or maybe 800 million people online, for what might be legal or illegal. And so they're putting that liability on platforms. Where does this rest, in the sense, what's the balance that needs to be struck here?
The government coming after the pipeline is not new. This has always happened.
It's the easiest thing to do.
It's the easiest thing to do. And when you have population explosion in the manner in which it is happening, internet explosion, every single person, getting access to voice what they were saying in their drawing rooms on a public media, it won't happen. Me as a lawyer, and I echo here what Apar said, that you need to have a strong civil society. Today, let's take back a step where you said there's a difference between news and opinion. Which is the one law to my mind which makes that distinction very clear, and it is argued and established in courts time and again. It's defamation law. If you're asserting something as a fact, it's news. If you're asserting something as an opinion, which is your opinion based on certain facts, then it's opinion. And then when you have a defense that you go in a defamation suit to go and talk about, okay, this is my opinion, then you have all the other defenses of, oh, there is no malice. Then you have to establish all those things. Now, those are principles which are legally established principles. How do you institutionalize it? How do you educate the people to understand that, listen, if you are getting swayed by an opinion, it should not be the intermediary who should be held responsible. Yes, intermediary amplifying at their own end. And I'll give you an example here. And I won't take names here, but there was a litigation there was a criminal complaint filed because somebody bought on an e-commerce marketplace, there was, you can't list controlled substances, you can't list prohibited substances like pesticides, etc. Some seller wanted to sell, obviously, so he ingenuously listed a product under a different category, and therefore the product got listed. Not responsible for this. But then what happened? Somebody bought it, consumed it, and committed suicide. It led to a criminal issue. The intermediary is still not responsible. When did the intermediary become responsible? When they were not realizing that the algorithms are working in such a way that that same product is being promoted in the regular monthly ads as something which is selling. So please, other people can actually sell that product as well. That is when the intermediaries' algorithms had to be brought in and said, listen, this is something which is a problem. So your algorithms are working at an automatic level because a product is selling well. You are letting other sellers know that this is a hot selling product. If you want to expand your business, you can continue selling this product. List it online. But then that product ended up being something which was hiding a pesticide which led to somebody's death. They may become accountable. Now, in this situation, what happens? This is where the safe harbor comes in, only to the extent they say that this is you have to act fast. You can't then hide behind my safe harbor and I can't be held responsible, etc. Then future consequences, they can work it out. That is why you're cleaning the system happen. So this is, just an example, but I'm saying that this is where responsible intermediary behavior comes in.
Apart, talk a little bit about the IDC. Is this a framework that legally should be allowed to exist, in the sense I call it the social media censor board. Is it taking on that construct? Is there accountability for the IDC?
So based on,
is it the fact check unit and
based on representation? It's not like the fact check unit, it's different. In the sense that there's already a order which is already pre-existing. You're going to them as an examination. Yeah. You're then. So processes also for them have been varying. Processes also for them have been varying over a period of time. So I think firstly, what's important to understand is
a lot of the content which they block is for people who are not based in India. And sometimes they offer VC hearings, sometimes they don't offer VC hearing. They have in fact in court stated repeatedly, now they do not want to offer VC hearings any longer because people record the hearings. But they are exercising a quasi-judicial role. And we have open courts in this country in which proceedings are actually live webcast. The reason behind that is when we have attended hearings with our clients in which also they object to the presence of a lawyer, the lawyer's presence has been permitted because there are directions in the High Court order. So they will be hauled up for contempt if they do not permit the lawyer with the person. Okay. So in these instances, when the lawyer is there, the kind of questioning which has been done, if there's a transcript of that, that is extraneous to the legal determination of the content. And you can imagine what do I mean by these phrases.
We were told in the first session about what kind of
Yes, so I cannot say them. I cannot say them. Yeah. Subsequent to that, there's a requirement for that committee to provide you a copy of an order so you can go to the review committee. And even when you appear before this committee, right? It's not the IDC examining committee and the blocking rules. They do not even tell you the URLs in writing. They do not link it to 19.2 grounds. They do not give you reasoning. So what are you appearing before? What are you defending? What is that proceeding supposed to achieve? However, in some cases, they follow the process. We've done it in VLC Player and Vikatan. They did it. So they offered VC hearing. They took written submissions. They were polite. But those were also then cases in which one was a news publication which is more than 100 years old, opposed the British, and the other one was a software product which perhaps they knew themselves that they blocked in error. However, for the other clients, none of this is being done.
Are the intermediaries part of these hearings?
The intermediaries we are given to understand, given notices, and sometimes attend these hearings when the users are not there or have already appeared before them. And that's what we need to understand. That is where they get these orders. So I would just say that there's a lack of transparency, there's a lack of judicial process, and the recent news report that users should be given a chance to appear before these hearings. Well, if you read the rules, it says also user. So that is already there in the rules. If you read Shreya Singhal, it is presumed that the impacted party will have the ability to participate in this process and thereafter challenge its findings before a writ court. We have multiple petitions which began with Tanul Thakur for dowrycalculator.com, where the Ministry of Electronics and IT resisted giving the copy of the order. So we first fought it on the disclosure of the order. Thereafter, in certain proceedings, which I'm again in a council, these are all court records, these are public records, these are all court orders. In Rakib, they filed a count affidavit. They said for national security, we cannot give it. We'll give it on a sealed cover. I said, okay, then submit it in a sealed cover. Now they will do it. So they're resisting the disclosure of the order for a wide category of people. If you do not have an order, then you will first fight for the order. And if you fight for that order in our institutional process, you will expend time, energy, and your ultimate remedy will be frustrated, right? So you do not have effective remedy, and these restrictions are being done as and when under a process which is incredibly, I would say it's incredibly arbitrary and inconsistent.
Is this now also a mechanism to perhaps remove anonymity? As you've seen in the recent past that...
Yes, for all cases, you have to give an ID. If you don't give a government ID, you're not permitted into the hearing.
So, no, but I'm saying that the fact that someone's account got blocked and they had to appear in court and they had to identify themselves.
Yes.
So is this now a mechanism to remove anonymity of a user who may not have said something that is illegal?
I don't think so. They have thought that far ahead, but it is the unintentional benefit of sitting in a buffet. You get to eat one more thing. So yeah, that's what it is. I don't think so that far-sighted and evil as such. I would just say they're sloppy political. Okay, so that's what they're doing. It's not a real evil person you're fighting. You're fighting a system which is decided that it will exercise a power as per the political interests of what it's serving. So that's what's happening more often than not.
Jatin, how should policymakers respond to the challenge of scale in digital speech without resorting to centralized or executive driven enforcement mechanisms? How should they do it?
So sometimes patience is a virtue. You can't, just because there's a law and order problem, you can't unleash encounter specialists on the people and shoot the wrong people down. Right? This is a new animal. This is a problem. The scale and the extent and the virality of content is a problem. What goes viral, how it goes viral, we don't know. That's why, so this is something again that needs to be thrashed out, not in one such discussion, but in in 100 and 1,000 discussions. I mean, we always knew that in this country, process was for punishment. Now we have a situation in which the process is opaque. It is, it is also arbitrary. It's hidden from the general public, and it changes and emerges as a new monster. And when you try to shoot down or understand that monster, it has again changed. So this is a fundamental problem that we are facing. It's not just one iteration of the IT rules. It's a much larger framework that we are looking at, where the government wants to, or the state wants to become a police state and assume all the powers possible that have under the constitution traditionally been separated between the judiciary, between the executive and the legislature. That's why the pushback is so necessary. We should not get bogged down by the nitty-gritties or the specific sections or subsections. We need to step back and look at what is happening.
I'm going to open this up to questions now. Questions, comments, anyone?
Okay, guys, you still have a job.
You still have the right to free speech here. So let me just perhaps look at what next. Yeah, okay, Rajni and sorry. Mike, Rajni, sorry. So there are people watching online as well.
I'm just very curious. The government went and the fact check unit amendment is being heard in Supreme Court now. Like, what could be the game plan over there? Because whatever content they don't like, they anyway remove. So now why do they want to prove something is misinformation? I mean, that judgment happens elsewhere also.
I think I want to add a little bit to what you said. You're talking about algorithmic transparency, right? And that has been the case as, as a fact checker. This is our problem. People are rewarded. In fact, the algorithm rewards all kinds of nonsense. And when people do that, then, these problems get created. So, in fact, if you remember, Aishwarya and Abhishek's daughter has also gone to court, and I've seen a lot of videos coming up on where they talk about how this little girl is dead, when she was 7 or 8 years old. And a lot of YouTube videos, very clickbaity in terms of thumbnails. I think in the first session from the victims, we had also heard about how they had to change the thumbnails. So to your point, where you're talking about, when the algorithm does something, that's when people become liable. So it is very clear. I mean, a lot of people are just trying to get likes and engage. A lot of people, I'm not even talking about publishers.
Everyone's gaming the algorithm.
Trying to game the algorithm. In fact, there are...
I have a slightly different take on this. We also have a situation where the algorithm shapes how we behave.
No, of course, it is also there.
I'll give you an example. There was an article that Shefali Bhatt had done about how Instagram has changed its policies or its algorithm to essentially promote slightly more rural content, which is more real, because it seems that users are now pushing back against very artificial Instagrammy sort
authenticity
of...
Is the
authenticity is a new thing. So that means that the algorithm can shape behavior by rewarding certain
Not just
behavior,
that, even
right?
language. The language in which we communicate has also changed.
Hmm.
You know, people are not saying full sentences, you know, and also there are very niche, content. How do I say, pop culture references, but like on social media, which people don't care. Like obviously it changes language, it does change behavior and a lot of things.
Yes, 6, 7.
But I'm just talking about as a fact checker. As a fact checker, a lot of times when people write to me saying that, okay, we've been rated wrongly and this and that, they are just trying to do what they are being told you should do to make it big on social media and to make some money on it. And everybody is trying to monetize their content because maybe they don't have a job, maybe they want to leave their 9 to 5, maybe they want a side hustle. So if the algorithm is promoting this kind of behavior and that is creating problems, a sensational bite works better. We've seen this in mainstream media.
Certainly.
So that is what is kind of translating into social media also. So I do think that passive, what was it on you? Passive intermediaries is not the right terminology at all.
Apart, so there are 3 reasons which I can offer for the appeal being there and being prosecuted. And this is not speaking to the merits of the appeal, it's speaking on the strategic reasons. So I'm saying it. First is that the union does appeal everything. And it is criticized by the court for that, which are also routine matters of, just paying somebody their gratuity and pension. Somebody who served in the armed forces. And that's not particular to the past decade or 12 years. It's been a practice due to the institutional incentives which are there for panel counsel sometimes, and also the risk for the bureaucrat or the file person who's marked the file to avoid any kind of aspersion that they did not prosecute it to its full extent. The second is that the Kunal Kamra judgment, which is affirmed by Chandrukar, has the most elaborate reasoning on chilling effect. It's not there in other judgments, especially in a digital context, and called chilling effect. So it has a particular value which can be used to show in petitions which can be filed, in which there's a regulation which is not even in effect, and for which you don't need evidence, and you can still approach a constitutional court. And this is important because you anyways will never get evidence, because you will never have a public repository of blocking orders despite your right to receive information, and blocking orders being a public document, according to me. Third, the basis of the judgment is the Shreya Singhal judgment, which is a division bench judgment by 2 judges. And this is heard before the Chief's Court. And some hints of this actually have already been provided before Justice Nag Prasanna in Karnataka High Court, where the learned Solicitor General has made some of these submissions. So it's already contained in some of that reasoning. So both as of course, as well as of interest, is being prosecuted as per me, but these may be hypotheticals completely.
Assuming they win the case, then it leads to the formation of an FCU, right?
Then it leads to the overturning of Shreya Singhal, which means everything can be done. The slate has been wiped clean.
Got it. Thanks.
Anyone else?
I think, sorry, I remember a question was asked in the open house, is Shreya Singhal still relevant?
Yeah.
To me, Shreya Singhal will always be relevant. It's important to understand what Shreya Singhal was trying to do in terms of balancing technological innovation with free speech rights. It has been diluted. It will continue to be diluted to a large extent. As I said, intermediaries cannot be passive. Their roles are not passive. So therefore, their responsibilities and liabilities cannot be passive. They need to be responsible. But to that extent, what happens if Shreya Singhal is overturned?
There is a gap between the responsibility and the accountability of intermediaries. That's always been there. I wrote this in my headline in 2014. Right? That's a gap that exists. Law is filling that gap right now and using that gap to essentially censor speech. What you're also seeing is the creation of infrastructure along the way of initially an FCU, now an IDC. We'll probably see more come along the way. I just want I want to talk in hypotheticals now, and I'm curious about what each of you think the next iteration of the IT rules will contain. Who wants to start? Anyone in the room want to guess? I have a guess, but someone else?
I mean, with the introduction of Rule 3, sub Rule 4, I don't think they need to. Right.
Okay. Anyone? Arun, what do you think? Mike? So while we're waiting for the mic, my guess is that news-related content that is being generated by AI platforms will come under regulation for accuracy.
They have to actually build that to save who are not publishers or users of their
Mike. So AI for me, AI outputs, whether they call someone a fascist or not, that will now come under law. Arun?
Yeah, and on that same vein, enabling provision for
louder,
like an enabling provision for agentically like highlighting content for removal or for notice. Like,
so I think we discussed this over lunch today, that the fact is that you might have a situation where platforms might be like, think about the pace at which content is being taken down right now, speech is being censored now. And if government departments and police departments start using AI to issue orders through the Sahyog portal, because the Sahyog portal essentially brings in large number of people who can issue orders and a large number of intermediaries. So it's like a pipeline. That pipeline expands exponentially when you use AI to issue orders. And the determination of whether something is lawful or not can actually, with hallucination, can also happen using AI. So automated orders basically going through from one side and automated censorship taking places on the other side is probably the future that Arun and I were discussing today. Rajneel, you have a prediction? Mic's off. Don't switch the mic off, guys.
Similar to how the digital media ethics rules came about.
Again, it's off. Yeah, don't switch the mics off, please.
So similar to how you had digital media ethics rules, once they get news creators under the ambit, then they will have ethics for news creators and then want an SRO for that also.
No, but that already exists, no?
So you have to register, creators have to register for current affairs and news.
Yeah.
In which
YouTube channels have already registered. That's why DigiPub exists as a mechanism for online news entities to register.
News entities, right? Not creators. Now they want creators also to register.
There is some creator economy bill that I've been hearing about, which we have in the Rajya Sabha that's been passed.
So under the rules, Nikhil, my guess is ahead of the next, the February 2027 elections, assembly elections, UP, Punjab and all, something targeting political misinformation and the government deciding what is political misinformation.
Okay. Any other predictions? Yeah, Aarti?
No prediction.
No, hold on, then hold on. Predictions. We want to hear predictions. Prediction.
Independent Data Protection Act, they'll place age verification. And possibly if they don't bring in a complete act on it, because the states have started going that route. And I think it's very similar to the gaming regulation, how that happened. I'm sensing that movement because government also needs the underlying justifiable social purpose for larger expansion. It had it for SGI when Grok was happening, right? Remember? And digital arrest was happening. So you need a justifiable social purpose to push something.
at that moment.
So age verification under the IT rules.
Yes, they will
Age
try
verification in the IT rules. Any other predictions?
beyond data protection.
Any other predictions? No. Aarti, your question.
Yeah, just a clarificatory one. This is, so when you're looking at the rule essentially talking about news and current affairs published, hosted by intermediaries who are not publishers, UGC, does that apply to AI generated like chatbot response on current affairs as well? Is that also something that is possibly within the framework of MIB's committee?
I think it does, and that's what I said when Nikhil said that's his prediction. My understanding is the way it's been worded. It simply says any in news and current affairs on computer resources of intermediaries by users who are not publishers. Now, by users who are not publishers is very wide. Users does not.
AI is not a user, that's the thing, right?
Arguably.
So it doesn't have to.
I think
AI doesn't. Stephen Thaller's his petition got thrown away.
Talk about it.
Okay, no, so we actually interviewed him about AI and personhood. So yeah, so there's a personhood as of now. So it can't be a user.
I'm going to be raising this question on Saturday. Let me ask everybody in this room today. India is the only country who has identified legal personhood to rocks because we have deities, rivers. New Zealand also recognizes legal personhood to rivers. So non-human entities have been given legal personhood with a manager, which is human. Why can't it happen for AI?
Because there's no customer tradition.
Also because deities hold property. It's been legally recognized in statute. I'm not saying that just to contradict you. There is a justifiable purpose why it was evolved through social demand, investiture of property, and then how can you sue them, right? Because technically everyone is a fiduciary or a representative of a trust, right? Which is service of a deity. And I agree, like that on pure rational purposes, you can then extend it and you can say, why can't it apply to X, Y, and Z? But then it can also apply to notebooks ultimately like that.
I think that's the concern that I have.
Do you have a prediction, a question, or a comment, or a statement? Mike, we can't.
Right? If you're going down the path of LLMs and you've got agents, you've got people running OpenClaw everywhere, and you've got OpenClaw agents, that is an entity. It is the second big phenomenon that everyone is trying to execute right now, right? So does then the LLM move on from intermediary to user? Then that is not representation.
In mind, LLMs can't take the intermediary defense. AI tool deployers can't take the intermediary defense because they're ultimately deciding.
Mike.
They are. An intermediary is somebody who is just the pipeline. Arguably, we're talking about their additional roles in terms of how they are, getting involved in the content which is flowing through their systems. An AI tool creator, an AI developer, an LLM is ultimately deciding what is going in first, on which it is being trained. So, depending upon the kind of use you're making of it and what is the issue that you're facing, an intermediary is always in the context of a transmission. So, yes, in some cases, one may argue that, an AI tool was just an intermediary and not a publisher or involved having some contributory liability. But to my mind, in most situations, an AI tool will not be able to argue that they can take a hands-off approach and
they're not an intermediary, but they're also not a publisher.
They're not a publisher in certain situations, but for example,
unless you're grok on social media, you're not a publisher.
Example, there are all these, movie review sites, they summarize reviews. Are you not a publisher of that summary?
No, the person is published, but then that's communication to the public, not to an individual. The idea about, and this goes back to the issue of everything on the internet is one-to-one, not one-to-many. So you can't take a broadcast lens to the internet technically, and that's what I had also argued, that this is private. When you're viewing it on a device, it is private viewing. So it's not effective. It's also private communication. An AI chatbot is communicating with an individual, not with an ecosystem, not with a large body of public. The answers change every single time.
So
Yes,
there are two situations. I think the example that I was giving was in terms of, let's say, a public website where you have, so for example, summary of products reviews. That's not one-on-one, that's public.
Well, also an output is significantly dependent on the LLM in use and the tooling that you're using. So Kimi K 2.5 will give you a different response with an open code for coding and a different one with cloud code. So we're now going into AI stuff, but I can see the variance in every single activity because the dependencies keep changing. So there is no predictability and there is no control over the output because it's all probabilistic based on its own assessment, based on the memory deprecates over a period of time, it gets polluted or poisoned when you change context midway. The variables are so wide, you can't possibly have personhood for AI or hold it accountable for anything because it's not responsible solely for its output. So it's just that possibility doesn't exist. If it is, then you have to change the way LLMs function. Like if you use a cloud with a GPT-4 mini, you'll get terrible outputs. Use it with a Kimi K 2.5, you'll get better outputs. Use it with a Mini Max, you'll get even better outputs. The variance is too wide. That's why even regulating agents is going to be extremely complicated because how an agent behaves is dependent on the underlying LLM and the tooling and the context and your second brain or the memory bank that you've created, whether it's a knowledge graph or it's a LLM wiki or whatever. So sorry, I'm talking a lot.
The geek has taken over the
Sorry,
moment.
yes, I am talking a lot of tooling because I've built quite a bit of it myself. But I think that the IT rules discussion is kind of ended already. But you have an IT rules question or comment? Sorry?
On the IDC.
Okay, IDC, yes, please.
I mean, it's my first time at one of these events and it's quite eye-opening. But on the IDC, I just wanted to ask because I think the last session, the gentleman from the government said that the process.
He's not with the government, he was
with the government. That's a fine distinction. That if the process wasn't sort of justiciable in a writ court, but right now Apar said that you're fighting for the order. So is there a particular process for a aggrieved person to appeal to a writ court? And the second question that I had was that you began the discussion about what the difference between what news, current affairs, so on and so forth. And I mean, personally, for me, it's just that when you're on Twitter, like now, all I see is football videos. Whereas when one sort of signed up for Twitter, you sort of try to curate your, that you want. So the actual offering originally, which you signed up for, is no longer sort of.
There's a For You tab as well. And the algorithmic tab is based on what you look at. I get only AI related stuff. My entire algorithmic timeline is this AI tooling. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, so basically my question is, I've sort of totally gone off Twitter, which I used to use all the time. So is that like a sort of understanding within the sort of general community that people are logging off? No.
In fact, I mean, it depends. It's an individual thing. Abbas gone off. He has to use it a little, but I love it. Most of my learning is coming from social media. Social media still remains the best space to observe things that are changing, to observe trends that are emerging, to learn things, whether it's YouTube or it's X or it's Instagram. A lot of this culture is now internet culture. It's popping up there. So I don't see it. I don't see any shift taking place. People want that. They're creating culture as they go along.
But you much rather have I much rather have an editorial check. You get a newspaper, at least somebody.
Old school, man. But okay, but so we'll take this offline. But thank you everyone for joining us. We have hope still that some things might improve, but fairly bleak situation right now. But the thing is that
we are taking so fast.
We hit water soon because we're taking so fast. Fair enough. Thank you all for joining us, and I'd like to thank all of our supporters and partners. IFF, please, there's a IFF donation sign outside. Please donate to IFF. We'd like to thank DigiPub. They brought in the creators for the first session, which was quite moving, to be honest. And it's insane how much fight there is in some people. I was quite inspired. And thank you for the Center for Communication Governance as well. And to Amazon, Meta, and Google. They've taken a lot of punches from us during these sessions. Good, I think the way I was thinking about it is that there needs to be friction in the system. We've gone through many years now where the friction's been limited in the sense MeitY is doing what Home Ministry and MIB want without friction by the looks of it. MeitY is an intermediary for other ministries for IT. Platforms have had very little friction when it comes to directions that they're being given by the ministries. And many users have not been aware of what's been going on in terms of censorship. So any pushback right now from a user standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from a campaign standpoint, creates friction throughout the system that perhaps brings in some diminishing of pace at which this is changing. I hope the next set of IT rules don't hit us in 3 months' time. But if they do, that'll only prove the point that they're just being made whimsically. But thank you all for this. And
Thank you for.
no, we keep fighting the good fight. The press club has got plans, and so has DigiPub, and we're discussing about what we need to do to get the message out that this is impacting speech for journalists, especially. Thank you. And anyone wants to discuss AI, I'm around. I'm obsessively vibe coding these days.